You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
This month's Centresteer podcast is sponsored by Commonwealth Classics. Commonwealth Classics is a direct importer of classic vehicles from Europe and South America and has a rotating collection of rare and unique Land Rovers. Their showroom is located in Virginia, just 45 minutes from Washington, D.C. Visit www.cwclassics.com to view their current inventory of classic vehicles.
The Centresteer Podcast, a Land Rover podcast by Land Rover owners.
Welcome to the Centresteer Podcast, the first Land Rover podcast on the planet. Centresteer is a podcast by, for, and about Land Rover owners. This is podcast number 84 for March 2020. Next month is our 7th year on the air. Are we on the air, or is it more?
We have. This will be our end of our 7th year. That will be the beginning of our 8th year next month.
I'm off. Thank you for the correction. For posterity and reference sake, the novel coronavirus COVID-19 arrived in North America and Europe with a vengeance this month. So significant portions of both continents are in lockdown, shelter in place, or stay-at-home orders. So if you're listening in a year from now, or you're listening, 10 years from now, just keep that in mind. That's what's happening at this moment in North America and in Europe. I am your host, John Costage. Joining me via Skype is Harold, Morgan, and Dixon. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey.
Hello. Good day. And this time you don't have road noise in the background because of the virus. I'm actually still up in Canada.
You were supposed to be in Jersey, were you not, doing some work?
That's right, but not for the foreseeable future.
So you've had to postpone your important things.
I have had to postpone it, yes.
Our guest this month is Greg Byrom. He manages the New Zealand Land Rover Forum. He's going to tell us about Land Rovers, four-wheeling, and the community down in New Zealand. Well, down to us here. A good conversation. And as always, thanks for your comments, likes, follows on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and emails. Always enjoy hearing from you and what's going on with you. And as always, thanks for your follows, likes, comments on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and email. And now, via Twitch. We set up a twitch.tv account so that we could stream the stay-at-home Rover Rally. Well, yesterday for us when we're recording, but on Saturday, March 28th, streamed video Land Rover and Land Rover-related videos for 12 hours over twitch.tv. I think it's something that we may continue, not sure to what degree, but it was fun. Streamed something like 47 different videos over the 12 hours. And the best, I know Morgan and Harold and Dixon, you all chimed in at some point during the stream. I think the best was Rover related, but not directly Rover related, and that was friends of the show, Sandra and Bernhard, our Australian friends. Austrian. I was trying to keep that in my head. Our Austrian friends who are currently locked down in Mexico, but they had they toured all over the United States. They put a bunch of videos together, and the one that is called Beyond California or something like that, they took video of the south, kind of basically the southwest of the U.S. around the Grand Canyon. Just amazing, absolutely amazing.
Well, I think the production quality of all their videos is top notch.
Absolutely, completely agree. They great pictures and great video.
You'd think they were professional videographers, but they're amateurs. But they did stuff that's phenomenal.
It is. At one point, we were on the stream and in the chat. While there's a drone shot of their Defender Puma, might I add, driving down the highway, not a highway, a dirt road, and it's an large open plain, and the drone's behind it, kind of falling up. Everyone's like, "This is like a movie." It was really that was that good. We set up a Twitch account to do that and streamed videos. So that's the stay-at-home Rover Rally. While we all need to stay at home, at least here in North America and Europe, as I was indicating. Remains to be seen how that continues. I know, but it was fun. It was enjoyable, and probably, I don't know, maybe that could become a annual thing. I don't know, or maybe do it every now and again. I don't necessarily think I want to do it.
I think maybe our listeners should chime in and let us know what they thought, and if enough people respond, maybe we'll do it again sooner than later.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I don't think I want to do 12-hour streaming again.
That's a lot of work.
That was a bit much.
That is.
It's a veritable marathon of Rover porn.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Well, if you enjoy the stay-at-home Rover Rally and those kind of ideas, plus maybe you enjoy following the exploits of Oxford or our interviews with figures in the Overland and the Land Rover community, why don't you consider supporting the show? Visit our website, centresteer.com, for all the details. You can be a regular podcast supporter through Patreon. You can be a one-time supporter through Buy Me a Tea. You can even show off your support by purchasing a T-shirt or sticker. I even had someone make a straight monetary donation, so thank you very much for that. Last month, we thanked Bob Steele for being our latest Patreon supporter. This month, we thank Bruce Fowler, yes, Bruce Fowler of the Maine Winter Romp fame, for his Patreon support. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Uncle Bruce.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Bruce.
I think I want to leave that all in just the way it was. All right, let's get into the news. First up, coronavirus. JLR halts production at all UK plants. Britain's largest car manufacturer, JLR, is to suspend all production at its UK production plants in an effort to minimize the spread of COVID-19. The Coventry-based automotive firm, which has plants in Solihull, Bromwich, and Helwell, said manufacturing would resume on April 20th. Subject to review of the rapidly changing circumstances. JLR said, quote, the company will work towards an orderly return to production once conditions permit, unquote. JLR operations are still continuing in Brazil, India, and China. Its factory in Changshu, China reopened the week of February 24th as life gets back to normal in China. But sales in China are yet to rebound as its economy recovers from the worst of the virus. JLR's decision comes as BMW, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, and Vauxhall ceased their manufacturing operations in the UK earlier in the week. Bentley Motors is the latest firm to suspend UK production due to the pandemic. So it announced it would close its Crewe factory for 4 weeks.
Now, I read somewhere, and I'm not sure where, that JLR was actually going to shift their production they were going to have some lines open, but they were shifting their production over to making respirators, ventilators, something like that, to help in the fight against the corona.
Yeah, I wasn't clear whether they were actually switching over to production or whether they were just asked to research switching over to producing ventilators, but I heard the same.
So it might just be they're thinking about it and not necessarily wanting to do it.
And I believe, Harold, that was a request, or the research part happened before they decided to do the full shutdown. That's in my head. All that's right. The timeline. I could be wrong, but that was my.
I remember thinking at the time that this is interesting. Lucas Medical.
JLR stops production in Nitra following the decision of two big car makers in Slovakia, Volkswagen and PSA Peugeot, to temporarily stop production. The Nitra-based plant of Jaguar Land Rover will limit its operation. Quote, we will temporarily stop the production of the vehicles, though the last day will be Friday, March 20th, unquote, said JLR. New Defender and Discovery 5 production. That means that has stopped. Interesting, considering we also had Defender Media Launch Day this past week.
Well, it'll just be that much longer before people can actually have their own.
It doesn't make much sense to have a big media launch in, say, North America or Canada and in the U.S. When people really can't get out, or shouldn't get out.
Well, and in certain states, the car dealers have been ordered to close their sales operations.
Yeah, Pennsylvania, I think, is...
For instance, yes.
Not essential.
The service departments are allowed to stay open, but otherwise the dealers are closed.
Yeah, I haven't checked for Vermont, but we're in the same situation. We're on a statewide stay-at-home request, except for non-essential businesses. So I would expect them to be closed except for service centers.
JLR Chinese factory reopens after coronavirus shutdown, as we just mentioned, but this is the official article from Coventry Live. JLR has reopened following a period of closure. The Changshu factory is a joint venture with Chinese car maker Chery, was closed in accordance with local government advice. And the Changshu factory opened in 2014 and produces a range of JLR vehicles. Thought that was good to be reminded when it opened. It seemed like that's been 6 years. It seems like it didn't seem that long to me. Moving on past the specific virus-related news, JLR's Cashel Bromwich plant to produce several EVs. So JLR chose the path of gradual electrification for its lineup, and one of the major steps is to transform its historic manufacturing plant at Castle Bromwich into an EV hub. According to the latest news, 3 new EV models are coming in the near future, including the already officially confirmed next-generation all-electric Jaguar XJ. And then these are bullet points here. Next generation all-electric XJ, sporty and luxury sedan to be unveiled this year and enter series production in spring of 2021. An all-electric crossover SUV Jaguar J-Pace. And there's a note here that the J-Pace will be distinguished from the existing F-Pace, which will undergo a thorough facelift in 2021, by having a much more luxurious interior and more avant-garde styling, though it is not extended to mirror the I-Pace too closely. Harold, really, what's with all the paces? J-Pace, I-Pace, F-Pace?
Well, yeah, I don't get it. I don't quite. It makes it hard to tell them apart. But
it does.
I mean, I guess they're playing off the old marketing collateral stuff from the 50s and 60s. Their big words were grace, space, and pace. So it seems to me the big one ought to be the space, and they ought to use all 3. But right now they're only using the pace.
So maybe like the sport cars could be the grace,
Well, the sports cars could be the pace. The luxury cars could be the grace, and then the SUV could be the space.
There we go. So feel free, JLR, take that in your marketing, and maybe send Harold an all-electric SUV. He'd love that.
Yeah, I'm guessing I won't even get the crappy T-shirt.
Finally, on this mention here, there's also an all-electric crossover SUV Land Rover, codenamed the Road Rover. So apparently the Road Rover is back. He seems to come and go.
Oh, I like that notion. I remember the original Road Rover. It was kind of a cool little piece of history.
All 3 models are expected to be based on the next generation modular longitudinal architecture, MLA, envisioned for flexible production of BEVs, PHEVs, ICEs, versions of various models. Shifting to electrics, and there's some more articles here we'll have in a moment along the same way. Non-electric, Land Rover will downsize with a pair of hybridized turbodiesel 6s. Subheadline, it is the end of the V8 diesel as we know it. So Europe's automotive industry has ground to a halt, but the strict emission regulations that went into effect in early 2020 are still looming on the horizon. Land Rover is preparing to launch a pair of hybridized turbodiesel 6-cylinder engines in a bid to comply with the regulations and avoid paying huge fines. British magazine Autocar learned that Land Rover has applied the mild hybrid technology already offered on the Evoque and the Discovery Sport, its 2 small models, to a 3-liter straight 6 to obtain 300 horsepower. The company will also release a more powerful version of the 6 rated at 350 horses. The 6 represents a 2-pronged approach to replacing the 4.4-liter turbo diesel V8 available in Europe, among other markets. It delivers 335 horsepower, 546 pound-feet of torque, and sends the Range Rover from 0 to 60 in 6.5 seconds, while giving it a 7,700-pound towing capacity. These figures are hard to argue against, but it's an older engine that's increasing the company's fleet-wide average emissions output, so it has to go.
Well, I think they buy that engine from Ford anyway, so they kind of need their own.
And now they're moving over back to BMW, too.
Supposedly.
Yeah, it seems to be the case. I don't know if it's in any of these articles I read, but there was a reference to BMW again.
Well, when you first started reading the story, it said that the V8 was being replaced by a pair of 6-cylinders, and I'm thinking that'd be cool if I could get the pair available in one vehicle.
Yes, there we go. The future of Jaguar and Land Rover. Here's what to expect. The North American CEO dishes on the electric XJ and other cars and SUV secrets. This is from Motor Trend. Everyone is going electric, but given the high costs associated with developing EVs, it's little surprise luxury brands now lead the mainstream push. Tesla, and to a lesser extent Nissan, got the ball rolling. Mercedes-Benz created the EQ brand. The VW Group introduced the Audi e-tron and Porsche Cayenne. Ford says the Lincoln brand will lead its EV efforts, and General Motors has appointed Cadillac to lead on its side. But what about a company like Jaguar Land Rover, a much smaller automaker that consists of 2 luxury brands still wed to big, growling gasoline and diesel engines? We talked to Joe Eberhardt, president and CEO of JLR North America, about the automaker's plans when it comes to electrification. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'll let if this interests you, you can go out and check it all, but here's some highlights. Jaguar is preparing to introduce the next generation of its flagship sedan, the XJ, which we expect to see this year before it will become available in 2021. I think that's going to be an all-electric one. And then when it comes to electrification, JLR does not want to be differentiated by brand, say by making Jaguar the electric vehicle poster child, while Land Rover is the capable combustion engine SUV brand. The degree of electrification will be on a model-by-model basis. Quote, this is Eberhardt, quote, I don't think there's one size fits all. It will depend on the vehicle, platform, and even infrastructure. Clearly, on a large SUV, a full battery electric vehicle is more difficult. If you look at the geometry, if you look at the weight, if you look at some of the off-road capabilities, it's not as easy. So there's different powertrains that fit different applications, unquote. Diesels. JLR will also continue to offer diesel engines for the foreseeable future. Eberhardt again, quote, we still offer diesels in the Range Rover Sport, and Discovery. They do have some significant and fundamental benefits in terms of range, fuel economy, and torque for towing. It remains to be seen what the long-term future is for diesel. We have a good take rate. Customers are very happy with it. It's increasingly difficult and challenging, though, given the entire pushback on the industry. As far as we're concerned, it's a good powertrain to have, but whether it will be here in perpetuity remains to be seen, unquote. And Motor Trend says, in other words, JLR's diesel V8s, as well as its gasoline V8s and new supercharged i6 Ingenium engines, are not going away anytime soon. Which is interesting because apparently they didn't read the previous article that we did where they say they are. This was on March 25th, and the Autoblog article was March 26th. So apparently in one day, first the V8s are staying, and then now they're not.
Their move into electric is evolving, and we'll see if they stay consistent.
But then why on the one hand say some V8s, at least the diesel V8's going away, but then say the V8s are staying, or at least that seems to be cross messages. I think there's something.
Well, I think the one magazine doesn't know what wasn't up on the latest news.
And the way Eberhardt said, who represents North America, saying that diesels and V8s are good here and they have a good uptake, but they're only available, though, on Range Rovers and Discoveries, and we're not getting on the Defender, which is really, I think, where you should be putting it.
That's all their marketing strategy, considering that their fleet averages when it comes to emissions have been so bad in the past that they were happily paying the fines to import their vehicles into the United States and sell them.
Next, Land Rover's spiritual leader makes no apologies for the design of the new Defender. Yes, Mr. McGovern has talked to Gear Patrol. This is a lengthy question and answer article. I'm going to read you the question, read his answers, not on all of them, but a good number of them, and we'll take them as they come. I think this is a good one to read. You probably have a sense based on the title, the headline, of where this will go, and that's okay.
Well, I mean, was anybody ever really expecting Jerry to apologize for anything, ever?
Gear Patrol, if you have any complaints about the exterior of the new Land Rover Defender, Jerry McGovern probably doesn't want to hear them all that much. You'd almost be in the minority, he says, as the feedback to the new vehicle reveal back in September has been overwhelmingly positive. Still, as he told us during a lengthy sit-down interview, one in which we touched on the importance of design at Land Rover to that boxy element of the side glass, the SUV styling will look far better on the streets and in the wilds than it will under the hard spotlight of auto shows and dealership floors. Question, because there was also the DC100 before that, right? Answer, yeah, they were done really to keep the conversation going. We created those concepts to generate interest and also to start the conversation. From my perspective, they were useful because they actually inform me that that's exactly the way we shouldn't be doing it. This is in relation to the DC100 and then also the LR1 concept, which I think is what L663 came directly from. Question, what is it about the DC100 that you felt like shouldn't have been done the way it was? Answer, it was just too much. I think we were looking at it a bit too hard. There wasn't a purity thought to it. Proportionally, it was just okay, but the cumulative thing, it just wasn't right. Question, do you guys feel a lot of pressure to make it more retro? Answer, well, first of all, I don't use the word styling. But that aside, I was cognizant of the fact that there was a great deal of anticipation around the new Defender. I didn't even think about it like that, and I told my team we don't think about it. Further, he says, and so I hear other companies talking about the importance of design, but I don't always see it in the end result. And you made an interesting point there when you say there was pressure on you to make it more retrospective. Nobody puts me under pressure, and that's the great thing. You know, Ralph Spaeth, who's the CEO, and Mr. Tata, the owner of the business, he's retired now, but still involved, they were cognizant of the fact that if you want design to succeed, then let it and not try to compromise it. And I think that's been quite pivotal. So I don't get people coming up to me saying, oh, could you make it more retrospective? I don't get marketing coming up to me to say, could you do this? Could you do that? Because quite frankly, I don't take any notice of them. I'm employed as a professional. Design is a separate issue for the brand. I'm the spiritual leader for the brand. I defined what that vision is, and my team executes it. It might sound very arrogant, which it is. The reporter has a little note in here that they laughed. That's not to say I'm not listening to other people, hearing their views, and talking about how we get the balance right. I think retrospectivism is the kiss of death. Quite frankly, it's a slippery slope. That car created 60, 70 years ago was right for its time, but things have moved on. Next question. How did you or would you react to the people who came up to you and said, I don't like this car? Answer. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. That's fine. What I would say is when they start talking about the design is a discipline, and somebody who just criticizes design and looks at a design and has a view on it, they're not experts. I've spent my whole life designing stuff, but I respect the customer's views. If they don't like it, that's for them. But don't say that design is wrong when you're not an expert. If it is somebody who has an expert telling me that, then I'd have to listen. But once there's something there to critique, everybody becomes an expert, going on about wheel-to-body relationship, plan shape, proportions. When you've got a blank sheet of paper, there's nobody around with their opinion then. But that's fine, because that's what our discipline is about. People think I get sensitive. I don't actually. If people don't like it, fine. That's up to them. But I've met more people who do like it. I've been very encouraged over here, particularly. They know what they're looking at. Okay, yeah, next question. It does feel like you're trying to play up to the fact that a lot more urban users will be buying the new Defender. And he has a lengthy answer that basically says yes, and then he ends that answer with, and for me, there's an honesty about this design, which I suppose comes out particularly in the detailing of the lamps, the front face, the simple geometric forms. There's a rightness about it. It's not trying to be something it's not. When you look at the face, it's proud, it's strong, but it's not trying to be overly aggressive. It's got big lamps, it's got open eyes, and I think once you see it on the road, it will really transform and its character will come out. I think there's something to that, having especially, as we'll talk later, seeing it in the Namibia rollout. That was, I think there's something about seeing its character there. Question. I feel like the degree to which it was rounded off, at least around the edges, was a bit surprising. Answer. You still got strong intersections, shoulder, collar, all those things. And then the rear, that's really hard. A lot of the softening at the front is to do with aero. And actually, you look at the last Defender, even on those corners were bowled off. But the side of the old ones was so flat because the pressings were such crap. On some of these older Defenders, you look along the body side and it's like the Atlantic Ocean. Well, it's unacceptable for a modern day vehicle. What does he mean by looks like the Atlantic Ocean? Just a wide open space?
It's wavy.
Oh, wavy. Okay.
Which goes against him saying it's flat. I mean, I actually would love to have a Defender where the sides were flat. The problem is that, there's so much undulation, you can't get them to be flat.
I suspect he might say, well, the design was to be flat, but the engineering and production made it wavy. Maybe?
Well, I think it's more production than engineering. It's the production, the quality of the pressings were difficult.
Question. Was there any element of the design you felt really proud of when you were done? Answer. For me, it's got to be the total design. You have an overall feel of something that's right and always starts with the volume and proportions. It's got to work as a total. I'm very proud of that design, and it's not just me. That's the work of many talented designers and engineers. It's a team effort when it comes to car design. You can't do it on your own. Although if it goes wrong, I'm the one that's getting a bullet in the head. I like that answer because it's basically true. He wasn't the only one designing it. There was a team of people, but he's the one that's the face. He's on the front line.
Well, and it's right because he's the one that's going to take the blame because he's been the face of the whole deal.
That was good. So if you want to read the whole thing, we'll have, of course, a link to Gear Patrol in the show notes, and you can read that whole question and answer for yourself. But it's, I will say this, we've done this a number of times, repeating what Jerry has said and talked to other people. He's consistent. I mean, he has been consistent. This is the design. We needed to be forward, not look back. It has elements of the old, but it's not a retro design, and I think he's been consistent in that. We'll get back to more Defender news in a few minutes, but first, the 2021 Range Rover Spied testing and long wheelbase guise. The fifth generation Range Rover has been spotted testing its winter chops on the roads in northern Sweden ahead of its anticipated release in 2021. These spy photos offer a glimpse of the long wheelbase prototype of the car, which JLR is positioning as an even more luxurious vehicle capable of taking on upmarket competitors like the Bentley Bentayga. We already know this newcomer won't be a styling game changer, with JLR previously suggesting that 2021 Range Rover will bear a more evolutionary approach to design. The key difference is that this particular model marks the first time the big Range Rover receives the modular longitudinal architecture, MLA, which is also to be used on the new Range Rover Sport and the Jag XJ. Had we heard they were coming out with a Bentayga competitor? Or is this the first time we've heard that? I seem to think we've heard that before.
Well, I think they're just, trying to do upkeep on it to bring it up to current standards for them. So I would imagine that they're shooting for something above the Velar, but probably more similar to the Velar in terms of interior design, styling, and such.
Yeah, that spy shot, the rear does not taper down as much as the Velar does, which is good.
So they actually might be useful.
Yes, correct. As a SUV, but I don't think you're supposed to call them SUVs. All that was it. In Defender marketing material, Land Rover never refers to the Defender as an SUV. It's always a four-wheeler or an off-roader, I think is the terminology they use.
Well, I mean, it should be a UV, but they don't like that either. Because you can't go after the utility market at the price range they're putting the Defender. So
I saw some nice photos recently of somebody who stuffed hay bales in the back of their Defender and took photos of it, though.
Yeah, I was looking for those photos to include here in the show, and I forgot and couldn't find them again.
Of a new Defender or an old
brand
Defender?
New Defender. It was in the UK. They stuffed hay in the back.
Wow.
But here's the interesting thing about that. And that's why I wanted to find those photos again, Morgan, is if you notice, they have like 3 or 4 photos and there's 2 different colors of that vehicle. So I'm a little suspect that it's really a buyer of a brand new one and it wasn't maybe some sort of, marketing thing. Like, wait a minute, there's 2 different colors of that vehicle.
Interesting. I didn't catch that.
Yeah, check if you find them, maybe while we're talking and bring that up and see if I was right. But yeah, they did, Harold. They stuck like 4 hail bays of hail, not hail bays, bales of hay, 2 in the bottom, 2 in the top, 4 of them stuck in there. I look like they fit fine. Speaking of Range Rover, it is celebrating its 50th anniversary with massive snow art, which my personal headline to that article is "No one noticed." Because they did this unfortunately for them, in the middle of ramp up of COVID-19. But from the article here from Car Whale, the Range Rover was launched in 1970 by British Leyland as a bigger, sportier model to the standard Land Rover, which means this year the Range Rover marque has turned 50, and the British car maker celebrated this anniversary by creating snow art measuring 260 meters in diameter at the winter testing facility in Sweden. This massive art installation was made in sub-zero temperatures on the steering pad of the test track by renowned artist Simon Beck. 53,092 square meter anniversary logo was created by walking more than 45,000 steps across the powdery snow, accompanied by 4 Range Rover SVR models.
So the 3 guys driving Range Rovers, and this poor schlub's got to walk 22 miles.
Yep.
At least.
That's at least, yep.
Well, 45,000 steps would be 22 and a half miles.
Gotcha.
More or
Paying
less.
attention to a GPS, too.
And he did it with snowshoes on, so it's a little more work.
Damn.
And it looks really nice. I mean, the design looks,
What, did he draw the short straw that day, and he's the one that had to walk?
Well, he needed to get his steps in, Harold. He need to get his steps in.
Yeah, wow.
So he was 4.5 days in, so he could take a week off.
Yeah, that's my steps for the week.
Neat design in the snow. It's pretty cool. If you go out to, of course, show notes, link to the article, and you can see that logo. But yeah, it's unfortunate that the 50th anniversary of Range Rover kind of gets lost in.
Well, although it's a great way to practice social distancing.
Out of Australia, a motoring website, Land Rover Discovery SD4 HSE 2020 video review, and as a 4-cylinder diesel. And their question was, can the 4-cylinder Land Rover Discovery tow as well as the V6? It's about a 3-minute video. If you obviously link in the show notes, you can check it yourself. But they towed a 3,500 kilogram caravan. What's that in America? What's a caravan? What do we call a caravan?
It's a camping trailer.
Camping trailer, thank you. And they towed a camping trailer, a caravan with the 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo diesel. You can watch it yourself, but the answer is yes, it did a good job. They liked it. They thought it was a good engine for the task.
Mind you, were they pulling it up a grade?
The videos never showed it going up a grade, but he does reference going up a grade, and he said that the engine had to obviously work a little harder, but my recollection of what he said was that was okay. Like,
it's okay because he wasn't in the car behind.
That's right. So moving on to March 24th was new Defender reveal press release something day, I think it was. And of course, that was all lost, just as the anniversary of Range Rover was and all the other news going on in the world. Land Rover had taken a number of journalists to Namibia, and they did a 3-day drive, and then all of that embargo on those stories was up on March 24th. So a bunch of videos came out. So we'll go through some of this and talk about some of it and refer you to some good stuff to take a look at. Roadshow had a story, 2020 Land Rover Defender First Drive Review, The Real Deal, and author is Emmy Hall. I'll read a couple paragraphs here, and then if you want to read the whole thing, let you do that. I never really understood the charm of the Land Rover Defender until I drove a 2007 model to a 5th-place finish in the Rally Ash de Gazelle in Morocco. When it worked, which was 95% of the time, it was unstoppable. Its grunty diesel engine allowing me to keep pace in the dunes, and its solid axles working short work of rocky hill climbs. As Land Rover embarks on one of its most important relaunches, I'm happy to report that the new Defender is just as capable as the old one. On a 3-day journey through the wilds of Namibia, the Defender 110 conquers it all: rocks, river beds, mud, water, and soft sand. I'm sure it's good on pavement too, but I'll just have to wait to test it at home before making a final call. So she goes on to explain all the videos you see, which are most of the ones I've seen are easily almost a half hour. She basically does the same thing in text form. I recommend you go out and read that, especially if you're interested in the new Defender. Really, really good article and good pictures too.
And it was very good to hear her experience having driven the previous Defenders in off-road experiences compared with the new Defender in similar off-road experiences, and how much she actually enjoyed that, along with some of the technology hurdles that she ran into with it. So definitely well worth the read.
We'll come back to Namibia in a moment. 2020 Land Rover Defender splashing into the U.S. soon. Motor Trend says Land Rover remains on track to start selling the 2020 Land Rover Defender in the U.S. this spring, starting with a longer wheelbase 110 model, followed by the shorter 90 shortly after. Yes, I said shorter and then shortly in the same sentence. Of course, that can change in the current climate of shutdowns, lockdowns, quarantines, and more reverberating across the world economy. The new 2020 Defender is assembled at a much larger plant in Slovakia, as we know, that also builds a Discovery. The Slovakia plant temporarily closed. Adding the Defender obviously helps sales volume, Eberhardt says, noting the 80% of the SUV's early hand raisers and unique visitors to the automaker's website who configured a Defender are new to the Land Rover brand. The new SUV was first shown in fall of 2019 at the Frankfurt Auto Show, and in the first 6 months after that, the Land Rover website had more than 7 million unique visitors and almost 500,000 virtual build configurations, people even starting putting down deposits. I did, I think, 2 virtual builds.
How would they ever know who was unique and that these are all new people to it? I don't know. COVID must be really disrupting their whole reveal, because there was a Defender in Ottawa the other week that was here for the auto show, but that was canceled. So, it went off back to wherever. It's going to be interesting to see how they try and reset this, because I think they had quite a marketing plan all worked out to slowly bring this thing out, and everything is disrupted now.
Oh, yeah. They did. I mean, obviously, they took everybody to Namibia. They had these dates planned, and they were making the big push into the U.S. All these articles that are related to it coming back to the U.S. They put Eberhard out there to talk to all the journalists.
The various embargoes and so on they had.
Further in this article from Motor Trend, meanwhile, reports continue to surface that a smaller Defender 80 is in the works to compete with the Ford Bronco Sport, as well as a Defender 130 with more room in the third row, and even less likely a Defender pickup to chase after off-road beasts such as the Ford F-150 Raptor or Jeep's nearly as pricey Gladiator. So far, they are all unconfirmed rumor and speculation. And we know why pickup won't come here, because there's a 25% tariff on imported pickups.
The chicken tax.
And then Land Rover announces prices for the Defender in the UK. They're going to start with, looks like the 90, I think, in the UK at £40,300. The cheapest entry-level version will be the D200 90, which comes with a 4-cylinder 2-liter diesel. And it's a few grand cheaper than the longer 110, which at this price point, it will be one of Land Rover's least expensive models. That's all I can read the article because the Telegraph wants me to be a subscriber. And then Land Rover announces Defender launch date and pricing for South Africa. Land Rover South Africa has revealed pricing for the Defender 110, which is set to launch in June, and opened order books for the short wheelbase 90, which is set to arrive later in 2020. What I liked about this article was it lists each model, so and then gives a price. So you have the Defender 90 D2 400 standard, and then the line, the D240S, then the D240 SE, and the HSE, and they list a price right after that. So that was nice to read and understand. The cheapest one is the D90 at 948,000 Rand. Any idea what that translates to in dollars? Anybody know?
A lot.
A lot.
About $58,000.
There we go. That seems about right, since that's the price point that they seem to be pushing for.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that people were pricing these, some of them, the configurations out at 1.4 million Rand, that's a lot of money.
Actually, you are correct, Harold. I think in here, yes, the listed the specific model, the D110, the 177 kilowatt. Is that what's the KW mean? Oh, kilo.
No, kilowatt. Yeah, that.
They're not, but these
1,000 watts.
This is not all. These aren't all the electric models.
No,
though.
but the watt is a metric unit of power. There are 746. Yeah, 3/4 of a kilowatt is a horsepower.
Okay. So the 110, 177 kilowatt D240 first edition, 1.199 million Rand. So you are correct, Harold.
Wow.
If you've got a calculator, it's 16.5 Rand to the dollar.
So about $70,000, something like that. Doesn't sound as bad in American money.
Not when you convert it, no. The one I saw at the Pittsburgh Auto Show was almost $90,000, and that was a Defender X first edition, I think.
So that'd be what, 2 million Rand or something like that?
Now, Jalopnik had an article that came out before the March 24th, and this is pretty nice. Here are my favorite 2020 Land Rover Defender features after field testing in Africa. So the author says, I had agreed to hold off on publishing Defender driving impressions until the end of March in exchange for being among the first to take the vehicle on an earnest overland expedition. All of these came in handy in one of our Africa safari. They don't count as driving impressions, does it? And he's talking about the things that he finds interesting, which I'll read in a moment. He has a little full disclosure in here, which is nice. It gives a summation of what happened in Namibia. And so I'll read that to you because it's informative. The amount of money Land Rover must have spent to get myself and dozens of other journalists from all over the world to Namibia for 8 waves of 3-day, fully supported off-road expeditions for the Defender launch. I mean, I can't imagine. I'm sure it was a whole lot more than I make in a year. The event was quite something, though. You'll read about it soon, I promise. And that was on the March 24th thing. So these are he liked the jump seat center console. That's the one that has the flips down and has a third seat. Spectacular windshield wipers. The Defender's windshield wipers look pretty standard until you pull the lever and see the cleaning fluid spray out of the nozzle from the wipers themselves rather than from the mounts on the hood. Is that a first for Land Rover, or have other models been doing that? Does anybody know?
I know Jag's been doing it since the 90s, but I don't know if Land Rover's been doing it.
Range Rovers. I guess all you do is look at the hood, I suppose, or the bonnet and see if there's those mounts on there or not. The integrated ladder. He says, I didn't even realize that the Defender's optional roof access ladder folded out until I started messing with it, but it does. And the mechanism actually works really well, even when it's dirty. And there's a video on this one. So if you turn the key and unlock it, it pulls out and then slides down and allows you to step up onto the roof. Recessed winch. He liked that it had one. Off-road readouts. There are a few things I enjoy more than gauges and readouts providing specific, seldom relevant off-road related information, and the Defender delivers in spades. Not only is there pitch and roll inclinometer, but there are also measurement displays you can call up which show the vehicle's dimensions, approach angles, and these change when you adjust the vehicle's ride height and the multi-mode air suspension. Delightful and particularly useful when facing killing rocks and other such things in the parking lot. Dashboard storage. Almost every inch of the Defender's cab gets put to work, and you can see this in the well-lived-in unit here. The infotainment screen, while readable and prominent, barely takes up any space, but there's plenty of room to stash whatever in and around the passenger area. And bless it, there's a volume knob. I think is a good thing. I think that should have been called out on its own. There's a volume knob. The backward-facing snorkel. The factory optional snorkel seen in Land Rover's catalog as a raised air intake very smartly has its snout facing rearward. This way, the engine's not force-fed dust and dirt, as the heavier air particulates stay lower and most would just blow around this air intake altogether. There's no fender cutting required to install it either. The snorkel feeds into a fender vent that's present on all Defenders.
Mind you, that's not a new feature with the snorkel. When I put the snorkel on your 110, I used the existing vent.
But this is a factory installed and factory capable. I think that's not saying a new thing, but it is certainly a good thing, and it was well designed that the intake isn't facing forward.
Right. Snorkels from the factory is a new thing, definitely.
Oh, is it? Oh, I thought they had done that before, but I guess. And then Autoblog, 2020 Land Rover Defender First Drive. I'll let you read the whole article. It's just like all the other articles to read about it, but I like their intro because it was also informative, and especially about the original Land Rover. Before setting out on this all-new 2020 Land Rover Defender article, please allow me a few words about its legendary predecessor. After a terrible winter, the British summer of 1947 was one of the warmest on record. It was probably shirt-sleeve order then when Maurice and Spencer Wilkes walked down the tree-lined track from their summer cottage and onto the expansive sands of Red Wharf Bay in Anglesey. Were their dogs frolicking alongside the two brothers? History doesn't recall, nor does it tell us much about their stick-in-the-sand sketch, which was soon engulfed by the incoming tide. But it was that drawing, illustrating the ideas of Maurice, Rover's technical director, and Spencer, Rover's managing director, which went on to play a crucial part in the development of the quintessential British utility, the Land Rover. I thought that was a nice paragraph, summed up everything there that happened. But then they go on to give their drive impressions. And you may want to check out the videos that are out there. And there were three that I saw. And there was one from Carfection, one from Top Gear, and there was one from Car Wow, and they're all about 25 minutes to 30 minutes or so in length. I'd recommend you watch them all. You'll get something different from each of them.
Another good excuse to stay home for a little bit longer. Watch all three videos.
Could maybe make that part of a stay-at-home Rover rally even, right? They're in-depth reviews. If you watch them only for the scenery, it's amazing. In Namibia, the scenery was just absolutely stunning, and they actually did go off-road, and when there was riverbeds, there were rock climbs. I don't think there was any tarmac at all. So it was truly an off-road event, and the cars were completely covered and dirty and filthy, and all three of them have the vehicle traveling on the riverbed at speeds, and you can tell they're going fast. And in I believe it's the Carfection one, if you listen closely, sometimes when they talk you can't hear what else is going on, but on that one you can hear the car shake and rattle a little bit, but it's nothing like a 1987 110 going at like high speed. It's probably doing 50-60 miles an hour, at least that's what they've said, and it kind of does look pretty quick going over some of those almost washback
or a Series 3.
It is definitely, they at least certainly seem capable, modern, certainly. I don't think there were any technical breakdowns. There was some concern about, would the software have problems or cause issues or something to stop working. That didn't seem to happen. At least none of the ones I saw any report of that. I think there were 2 tire punctures that had to be replaced, but that's probably to be expected, right? That's a consumable.
Right. My concern would be the pounding for months and years on end. What's going to happen? A couple of weeks is one thing, but years is another.
I mean, I have been testing for years in some form or another, so hopefully they've sorted that out. Well, I mean, at least the chassis part, not necessarily everything put together. And don't they have those simulation facilities where they'll run for days, weeks, and just let it run all the time?
Simulations are great, but they're not as good as the real thing.
Take a look at I recommend you look at those 3 videos and read those articles if you're interested in the new Defender. Maybe you're thinking about buying one or want to keep up on things. They were, I think, particularly informative. And while they were out there, I thought this actually should have got more play than it did. There was a stuck 20-ton truck in Namibia, and two of the new Defenders pulled this truck out of the riverbed to get it unstuck. It was a 20-ton truck during the media drive, and two pre-production Defenders were in Namibia for the media launch. The event was held where tarred roads are a rarity, and ephemeral riverbeds are often used as roads. It was on one of those dry watercourses that the stricken Scania truck, did I say that right? Is it Scania?
Scania
truck, which Land Rover estimated to weigh 20 tons, was found. Putting the rated recovery points to good use, the two Defenders were able to pull the prime mover up the bank and out of the river to firmer ground. And I thought I read one was gas and one was diesel. I thought that should have got more play.
Agreed. It was impressive to watch them pull it out.
And it wasn't mentioned in any of the media articles, which I thought was interesting, unless maybe those two were not American media. Combining Land Rover and virus news, the Defender deployed to the coronavirus front lines. Part of the media release day, they had, I think, about 130 Defenders ready to go for media release day, and Land Rover repurposed them for the Red Cross. So Land Rover Defender has a storied history of responding to crises, and the novel coronavirus, which caused the COVID-19, has quickly become a global fight. It's only appropriate that just as the Defender returns, the rugged SUV is once again being deployed to the front lines. Land Rover announced that is providing vehicles to emergency services and other organizations, including the Red Cross. The public relations director, Richard Agnew, followed up the tweet that said that the vehicles originally meant for the press and had been repurposed. Total, there are 105 Defenders shipping out for duty, and around 30 or more will be prepared for next week.
So Land Rover's back in the meat wagon business.
Hopefully not, but maybe.
That's it for new Defender news, but this is related to the virus. DC Frey is raffling off its Land Rover to raise money. And DC Frey is a sports event and media company. Frey is trying to find positive routes through the crisis. To that end, it's decided to raffle off the company's 1986 diesel Land Rover Defender, and they pledged to give away at least 10% of the proceeds. He's hoping to get up to 20% to local relief funds and also the Restaurant Association. I think this is a Washington, D.C. area. Company sets a $15,000 reserve for raffling off the Land Rover, which even at that price point would be quite a bargain. You get 10 entries for $10, 30 entries for $20, and 80 entries for $50. The raffle closes April 30th, and the drawing will be held on May 1. So if you're in the United States, and particularly maybe around the D.C. area, and you're looking for a way to get a Land Rover Defender, there's your opportunity.
And perhaps do some good, too.
Land Rover Defender could soon get a baby brother. Okay, I lied. There's more Land Rover Defender news. Australian website Whichcar, which learned that the British firm is in the early stages of designing an aluminum-intensive platform it will use to underpin smaller models. One will borrow styling cues from the second-generation Defender to take on the Jeep Renegade, a move which would push Land Rover further down market than it has been in many years. Another will slot it in the Range Rover family below the Evoque and as an alternative to the Audi Q2 sold overseas and the Mercedes-Benz GLA. Sister company Jaguar might use the architecture too, and they're referring to a 130. I want to bring this up about Ford because there's I think coming out of the blue, we've talked about this, but the Ford Bronco is going to be competition here, and they're preparing to bring back the Bronco as a body-on-frame off-roader aimed squarely at the Wagoneer, and it will capitalize on the nameplate's newfound popularity by putting it on a smaller crossover named the Bronco Sport. The latter will ride on a car-like unibody platform, but the two models will share a handful of styling cues. The Bronco and the Bronco Sport will go on sale in 2021.
I don't know. I think they missed the boat on that one. I think the Bronco Sport is kind of like they're hijacking Land Rover's naming scheme there. I think it should have been the Bronco and the Bronco Junior or something like that.
Wasn't there a Bronco Junior?
There was a Bronco 2.
Right, you're thinking of the Bronco 2, which was a smaller Bronco.
But see, Harold,
Right.
They borrowed from Land Rover even then. That was like the Bronco Series 2. So the Bronco 2, they've always been borrowing.
Well, except they didn't call it the Series 2. It was just Bronco 2, which actually was more like them hijacking their own scheme with the Pinto 2 and the Mustang 2. And the Mustang 2, which was a Pinto. I think that's how it works. But yeah, anyway.
That was the end of Land Rover news, but it's not. There's more. And this one's, I think,
But wait, there's more.
The story behind the 4x4's production. This is Autocar out of the UK, and they took a tour of the Nitra plant. The factory at Nitra has been up and running since October 2018 when it began building the Discovery, which also relocated from Solihull. A bit like Nitra's operations director, in fact, Russell Leslie is a friendly Brummie who moved to Slovakia after 26 years working around the world for JLR, including managing the Defender line. He explains that getting production moving at Nitra was easier than usual because the Discovery already had been established engineering processes, but now the real challenge begins. He says, quote, "The eyes of the world are on us. We were hugely proud to be building the Defender," unquote. In his lengthy article, it talk a lot about him, of course, and things, but I want to bring out the highlights about production. Nitra has an annual capacity of 150,000 cars. Last year, around 38,000 Discoveries came off the line, plus up to 2,000 Defenders. JLR won't comment on volume predictions, but the fact that the site is just a quarter of its capacity suggests there's an awful lot resting on the new Defender. The Discovery and the Defender run on the same line, back to back, and there's total flexibility on how many of each is built. Leslie explains, quote, "There are nuances of the cars being slightly different. For example, we've purchased Discovery's tailgate and make the Defender's tailgate. But in general, we drive for a standard process in order to drive efficiency in the manufacturing lines. We put the seats in both cars in the same station, for example," unquote. He further goes on to say, "The technology is significantly different. We build both Defender and Discovery in a body shop with 642 robots. I don't know how many we had in the Defender body shop back in the day, but it was probably single figures."
They had one, but it was broken, so they didn't use it.
Was it a Lucas robot?
Probably.
The system helps to transport 400 parts that together form the shell of the car. The first major step is assembling the underbody, body sides, and roof header, creating a box that's instantly recognizable as the Defender. Body shop director Christian Clayson says, quote, "Everything here has to be perfect to 0.5 millimeter of accuracy. It takes 2 minutes to put a body shell together," unquote.
0.5 millimeter, that's new territory.
And 2 minutes?
Well, yeah, the 2 minutes, that's fine, but 0.5 millimeter, I'm thinking, half a centimeter was pretty damn close before. Some days it felt like 0.5 meter was reaching.
To achieve the required stiffness in the aluminum structure, and this Defender is claimed to comfortably be the stiffest Land Rover yet, 3,600 rivets are used, plus 160 meters of glue. Clayson comments, quote, "The beauty of building an aluminum structure is that it's cleaner and quieter than welding shops. But riveting is very sensitive. It's not as forgiving as the welding process," unquote.
How many rivets did you say?
3,600.
It'll take a while to count all those, won't it?
The only human-led part of the body shop is the cladding line, on which doors, fenders, bonnet, and boot door are applied. Finally, the car goes to be checked. There are 3 stations to rectify any issues, says Clayson. Bypassing the paint shop, it's time to head to the trim and final hall, easily the largest at 134,000 square meters. The first job here is removing the vehicle's doors so that workers can easily fit the interior. But far more mesmerizing is a glass-fitting robot that lifts, glues, and places a sunroof in less than a minute.
So they mount the doors and then they take them back off again?
Yeah,
what
that
the hell?
seems interesting.
Well, I mean, somehow you could time things so that you're doing the interior before you're putting the doors on it, I would think.
What I think I left out, there was painting going on, so I think they put the body shell together, they paint it, and then when it comes out of paint, then they take the doors off and build the interior. I think that's what happens. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Because they have this very modern paint shop, which I think I may have skipped most of that on this article.
Okay. All right.
That
starts to make a little more sense. Well, yeah. I mean, normally, you'd think you'd want to paint the pieces separately before you put them together. That's certainly how I do it. But in terms of consistency of color match, I think it makes sense from a production standpoint to put it together and then paint it.
And then finally, what comes to mind when Slovakia is mentioned? Maybe beer or castles, but probably not the car industry. Yet remarkably, since 2007, the Central European country has been the world's biggest producer of cars per capita. Last year, 202 cars were produced per 1,000 inhabitants, with a total of 1.1 million vehicles built. Alongside JLR, other big players include Kia, the PSA Group, Volkswagen Group, which builds the Volkswagen Up, and luxury SUVs, including the Audi Q7 and Porsche Cayenne there. Once an agricultural country, Slovakia can now thank vehicle makers for half of its total industry.
So it sounds like the people of Slovakia are trainable and will work cheap.
I would tend to agree.
I think that's the case. All right, that was the end of New Defender News.
Really? You sure about that?
No, but I'm going with it. This is a cool article. You'll like this one. Behind the scenes at JLR's Special Vehicles Operations, also auto car. I'll let you go and, of course, read the whole thing. I'm going to pull out some highlights. Your first thought when you step over the threshold of JLR's £20 million Special Vehicle Operations Division in Brighton-on-Dunsmore, just outside of Coventry, is that you've arrived in the foyer of Formula One team's headquarters. But whereas F1 teams make half a dozen cars a year and don't build the engine, this place handles vehicles by the thousand. Managing Director Michael Vanderslade says SVO's job is to take JLR's already potent and luxurious models and amplify their characteristics at times, turning them up to 11. And somewhere in the middle of these is a breed of standard cars whose owners desire only special paint jobs. SVO handles around 5,000 of these a year and has an innovative robotized plant whose smart ovens, JLR claims, save enough heating to power 65,000 homes a year. Quality is extraordinarily high. The production line SV models may not be built on SVO's premises, but they're still very much the business of Vandersade and his engineering director, Jamal Hamidi, whose spectacular pedigree includes time as the global engineering chief of Ford Performance, responsible for cars including the Focus RS and the latest GT. SVO's contributions to group earnings is described by Vandersade as very significant, although nobody inside or outside the group will talk precise figures. It's obvious and becomes clear as we walk around that this is a very high margin business. The most modified cars we come across, some keep secret until their owners see them for the very first time, are akin to works of art and so require months in preparation. Do customers ever insist on bad choices? According to designer Adam Hatton, who has particular expertise with bespoke projects, it's rare. Quote, clients have strong likes and dislikes, but they're rarely adamant. We advise them no more than that. In rare cases, we might emphatically discourage someone from making a choice we think they'll regret, unquote. Would SVO ever do a Range Rover Evoque SVR? It's a possibility, allows Vandersade, but not in the short term. SVO is limited by how quickly its engineering teams can grow. There's little teasers for you from the tour of the SVO factory. And the picture, it's like immaculately clean. It's you could eat off that floor. Although I think that's the showroom, right?
Wow. Yeah, I suspect there's a couple dirty spots in there somewhere. They're just not going to let you see them.
And there's a number of pictures, some from inside. I'm sure it's all kind of cleaned up. Yeah, you may not necessarily get to see the actual workspace, but it's certainly very clean and doing some neat work there. So yeah, if you want to learn more about the SVO operation, that's a good article to read. And if you want to learn to drive in the snow in a Jag, this is the article for you from Popular Mechanics. Every now and then, a car company will invite a few journalists to some frigid northern test facility to drive some new model that's in the throes of cold weather testing. And while it can be illuminating to learn how they keep the tires from shattering at 20 below, these testing grounds are normally off limits to the public. But Jaguar's near Arctic proving grounds in Sweden is different. January through March, anyone can book winter driving lessons at the place where Jaguar tunes its traction control and anti-slip systems. Except at the Jaguar Ice Academy, those systems get turned off, and that's when the fun starts. Yes, they said Jaguar Ice Academy. Pretty cool. You can read the article and see what they do. They take some F-Paces and I think is it the E-Pace, I think, and maybe an XJ, and you can learn to drive in the ice. And when you're done driving, there's more to do, like snowmobiling, dog sledding, or drive to the Arctic Circle. Couples can sign up with one non-driver too. Depending on the whims of atmospheric electromagnetism, you might see the northern lights. Prices start at about $3,700 for a 3-day program, and that includes food and lodging. Jag warns that given the intensity of the driving, the bartenders might be a little stingy with the pours on the eve of a lesson.
Seems to me a good opportunity would be to host the Ice Academy at the Ice Hotel.
So if you want to learn to drive in the ice, that'd be cool. I think it'd be a cool thing to do. It's pretty slick. I said slick, not nice. Yeah,
slick.
Yeah, that was not on purpose, but it happened.
They slipped.
Going to the opposite side of the world, Australia, there is a startup that's tuning old Land Rovers into EVs. Original Land Rovers were used to build Australia's roads, fight its fires, and toil on its farms for decades. But those that remain are more likely to be falling apart in a paddock or shed. Enter a privately and crowd-funded startup company based in Melbourne's inner north called Jaunt, which is buying up old Landies, ripping out their tractorish guts, and turning them into silent battery electric vehicle. As Jaunt points out, series Land Rovers are particularly perfect fodder for conversions. Their aluminum panels are free of rust. Their body-on-frame construction makes them easy to work on. They're built to carry heavy loads, such as a bank of batteries. Moreover, there's still a large part network and heaps around. To show what it means to do, Jaunt has built a proof-of-concept model with the cutesy name of Juniper. Juniper is a 1971 Series 2A that has been given the full treatment. But the engine, fuel system, exhaust, and cooling systems have been yanked out in favor of an electric motor and lithium-ion battery pack under the bonnet, an onboard AC charger receiver, a regenerative braking system, and even a power steering motor. That is the Jaunt Juniper. Although in the picture, it looked like the batteries were under the tub.
Where the fuel tank would be, yeah.
And the motor was in the engine bay.
Yeah, it looked like a combination. They had some batteries under the bonnet as well, because they probably need to stuff quite a few batteries in there to get the kilowatts that they're providing.
Well, and that's the thing about batteries. You can put a few here and a few there, as long as they add up to the right amount of watt hours. You're good to go.
And to balance the vehicle at the same time.
Correct. Yes.
That's a good point. In the article, I didn't read it, but I recall reading something about they were originally hoping to use old Tesla batteries because those batteries are denser than the ones they're using, which I thought was an interesting comparison. I guess maybe Tesla has probably their own battery capability, I'm guessing, manufacturing.
They do have their own batteries, but at the same time, you're going to have to leverage the Tesla software and so on to manage them. And whether or not that's feasible or not is a whole different discussion.
Yeah, I think there are some other small EV producers who are using Tesla batteries and have some kind of solution for that. But part of the problem that this company, Jaunt, is running into is procuring batteries in general. And that's why they're looking at, in addition to the density of the batteries, just the availability of wrecked Teslas that they can recondition battery packs from.
Yeah, I recall that Tesla was hoping to use wrecked Teslas to turn into the batteries for your home. I forget what they called that. It was like a home battery pack. Then there wasn't enough wrecked Teslas for them to do that.
Tesla Powerwall.
Powerwall, thank you, yes.
The lack of wrecked Teslas for them to do this project with, is that why maybe they turned up some of their self-driving technologies to make more wrecked Teslas?
And I have a thing about too much lighting on vehicles, and that's why I'm talking about this next article.
You have a thing on too much lighting anywhere.
I do. I'm not a direct lighting person. I like indirect lighting, but on vehicles, especially, there's just so much front end lighting anymore that even I understand accent lights and I understand headlights, but anymore the accent lights have become a second headlight. They're so bright, and then people have fog lights, which are really auxiliary lights, and they're on all the time. So on some vehicles, including a certain Jeep model, I don't keep track of them exactly, but it looks like they have 3 sets of headlights on each side, and it's just too much. And then some of the modern Ford F-150s, I don't think they need to run their headlights because those accent lights are bright enough. Anyway, so I have this thing. Yes, I'm bothered by too much lighting.
Some of them have so many lights running that you can't even tell when the headlights are on or not.
Yes, there's just too much lighting, and then when you add these accent lights that are seemingly, they look to me as bright as a headlight. They may not be. Headlights are probably aimed in a certain place in a certain way, and that's good because they're usually trying to keep it out of the vision of the opposing traffic drivers. That same consideration hasn't been done for the accent lights, which to me are
right. Yeah, they aren't focused generally. They're a scatter technology. Right. But the other thing to consider is that every light you put on there is going to consume some power, and that power ultimately comes from the fuel. So you really don't. If you need as few lights as necessary to see where you're going and for people to see you, and anything beyond that is really just wasting fuel.
Though LED technology is going to drop your utilization of or requirement for electricity.
Well, absolutely. But even so, if you've got 54 LEDs when you only need 36, you're still using more fuel than you need. It's not as much more, but you're still using more.
In that sense, yes.
So a company has come out with aftermarket Range Rover Sport taillights. And how much would you pay for aftermarket Range Rover Sport taillights? Would you pay $500, Would you pay $1,000? Would you pay $1,500? I hope you would pay $1,500 because that's how much they are. That's these rear taillights. They're cool.
My answer would be E, none of the above.
Yes. I mean, they're cool and they're interesting. And I don't understand why Land Rover should get into that game with customized taillights, and they could charge $500 and probably make $497 on the deal. But anyways, these are out there. And I only brought it up. I don't care about the rear taillights. That doesn't bother me as much as this gives me a chance to rant about Ford illumination being out of control. Thank you.
But at the same time, when we were kids, you could do all sorts of things and change all sorts of things on your car, customize it, and do something to it. And with modern cars, you can't really do anything. So there's obviously seems to be a market for someone that's got a Range Rover Sport or something, wants to change the taillights, has got a deep pocketbook, and is buying something different for it because that's about all they can do to these things anymore, short of chipping it and blowing your warranty out the window.
That was my opportunity. Thank you for the platform. Moving on. From the 4x4 Festival, and this is really cool. Mike Bishop, who has been on the show as a guest, and I think he still listens to the show. So, hey, how you doing, Mike? Mike Bishop's a product specialist at Land Rover, and he may recall took care of, what was it, AC260? Is that it?
So I know it's one of the pre-production prototypes. It was the one owned by the service department, the one that Roger Craythorne learned to drive on.
And exactly. So anyway,
very cool story.
Well, he still works for Land Rover. Land Rover put out a video that he features in talking about two Land Rovers that are, we will call them heritage vehicles, at the 4x4 Festival. And that was really cool. One was that we had talked about and got confirmation on thanks to this video. And one was Steve McQueen's Land Rover 2A. And I'll let you, it's a 2-minute video, 2.5-minute video, but found out that he put into his contract for the movie that he was on in London that he, instead of having a driver take him to the set, he got a Land Rover to drive himself to set.
Of course he did.
That was cool.
Because he could.
Because he could. And so Bishop shows you that vehicle and talks about there, and also a Great Divide Range Rover. It was there at the festival. So if you want to see stuff that probably we would more appreciate from the 4x4 Festival, go check out Mike Bishop's 2.5-minute video thanks to Land Rover USA. Of course, we'll link in the show notes. And finally, we'll put this into the Oxford Watch category from the Sentinel source, which we believe is in Massachusetts. And this is a very short article. I'm only going to read you the first sentence, though. A piece of automotive history was on hand in Hancock recently when Hancock resident Paul Ottelson brought Oxford, a 1955 Land Rover, to the town library where patrons could take rides in the unique station wagon. In the antique station wagon.
Unique as well.
So it's a short article, but it's let you know that Oxford is still out there, even in the midst of COVID-19. And it was in Massachusetts, and we think Hancock is in New Hampshire.
I believe Hancock is in New Hampshire. And then after this, there was an event in Boston, which I think had the absolute best name for a Rover event ever. The name of this event, and he put this together for people to meet and greet with Oxford, but the name of the event was One If by Land, Two If by Sea, None If by Lucas.
Very nice. And I was very fortunate to just the week prior to see Oxford in central Vermont. Peter Vollers of Vermont Overland had set up a Bonnets Up visit, a gathering for a small group of people, probably about 15 people. Yeah, it was very nice to get a chance to see Oxford right before everything started getting shut down. So I hope everybody else gets a chance.
This was not the event at Manchester then? This was a different one?
Yeah, correct. The event at Manchester was at the Equinox for Land Rover Experience. So you had to bring your own Land Rover to that event to get in. And this was a small free event at a farm in central Vermont. And with a little bit of off-roading, there was a small trail that everybody went on. I did not actually attend that portion in my non-Land Rover vehicle, but there were quite a few nice specimens on hand, so that was nice.
Did you ride cargo with someone else?
I did not. No.
Ah,
I know.
And Peter put out a nice 12-minute video about that event, and we showed it on the Stay-at-Home Rover Rally. But if I remember, which I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It was a nice video. Well done. So Oxford is still out there. Thankfully, I think it's kind of a combination of things. Oxford wasn't overly scheduled this particular point in time, so the lockdowns are, I don't think, affecting it as much as it probably could have if this were to happen, let's say in June, July, August, September. That would have had a significant impact on its visit.
Right. So far, the Rovers at Wintergreen is the biggest impact, I think.
That, yes, of those events, yes. Other events, I know Uhari, SCAR was canceled. I think one of the Uhari events coming up was canceled. I think Wintergreen is canceled or going to be canceled. I believe it's going to be canceled.
It's either canceled or postponed, one or the other, but it's definitely not happening on schedule. And that will be the next event for Oxford that is not happening.
Oxford's in self-isolation right now.
It's social distancing.
It's social distancing.
It's sheltering in place.
Sheltering in place in a happy rural place.
It sheltered in place for like 60 years on Ascension Island, so it's kind of, I'm sure, used to it.
No, it sheltered in pieces on St. Helens.
All right, well, that's the news for March 2020. And now, welcome to the Centresteer podcast. 18 hours in advance, talking with Greg Byrom, who's with the New Zealand Land Rover Club in New Zealand. Welcome, Greg.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, good to be here. Thank you for having me.
So we're starting this thing of talking of Land Rover clubs around the world and what's going on in their country, state, region, area. So you're another one on the list. Now we can tick off, I don't know if we want to tick off New Zealand, but we check, I guess.
You can tick us off. We'll be fine.
Exactly. You're in charge, you're president, of the Land Rover Club in New Zealand?
Right. Well, two words there that possibly don't quite fit us. One is the word president. I wouldn't call myself a president at all. President's probably bad. The thing is, we actually aren't really even a club. And we went through this a little while ago, trying to decide what it is that we wanted to be. And the previously used to be a Land Rover Club that covered the whole of New Zealand, and it sort of failed. It didn't really work very well. And my view, and the view of a number of others that I've spoken to, is that clubs generally tend to involve club politics, and that sort of turns people off a little bit. So, where did we come from? We started with a group for P38 Range Rovers, and it was on Facebook. I'll put that up front. But for anyone that's not a Facebook user or a social media user in any way, shape, or form, don't switch off your podcast or switch over to another channel or anything like that, because we have a story behind this that goes off social media and diverges a little. So keep on listening. But we started with a group for P38s, and as you know, the P38 Range Rovers tend to be the most maligned, possibly Land Rover.
No, it's Freelanders.
It's possibly Freelanders. I don't know, but
I'm in the Freelander Club, by the way, just for the record.
You're in the Freelander Club. Well, good for you, because we have a story that helps you as well. What do we want to be? Do we want to be a club? Do we want to be a charity, or do we want to be a company, or do we want to be something else? And in the end, we kind of settled on not being anything at all. Partly because it avoids all the politics involved. It allows us to keep control of things, and it just works. People like it better that way. And people join us because we're free to join, and there's no hang-ups. There's nothing to attach you to it. You don't have to pay an annual fee or anything like that. So we're not a club. I'm not a president. I'm just the leader, I guess. The person that clicked create group. In fact, I'm not even that. I'll tell you that story in a minute too. But
you're the person we're talking to. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
I'm the person you're talking to. Yes. I'm the person that's probably driven it the most, I think. So that's probably the reason.
How many people participate?
So that's a good question. It's sort of hard to know, because we do have some international people as well. So we've got people all around the world, really, but most of them have at least some kind of a connection to New Zealand. And I sort of said to them, when people joined, I said to them, you kind of got to have some kind of connection to New Zealand. What's your connection? A lot of people said, I'm just really interested in New Zealand. I said, that's it. That's it. That's fine.
Good enough.
No problems.
You let me in.
I'll let you in.
Yes,
that's true. The numbers are around 3,500 at this point. Now, that's not huge. That's actually pretty small in terms of a worldwide worldwide groups, but for us, for New Zealand, for the number of Land Rovers on the road here, that's actually pretty good. We think we've got around 10 to 15% of the number of Land Rovers on the ground here in New Zealand, and rising. And we've been going since 2015, so there's still a lot to go, but we're doing pretty good. And we're the largest Land Rover focused group in New Zealand. There are other groups, I should say, but we're the largest one. So yeah.
What type of trucks do people have?
That's a good question as well. So we've started 4 groups actually. So the structure is probably slightly different from other groups around the world. We actually have 4 different Facebook groups, and as I say, we'll be getting off social media in a moment. But the 2 largest of those groups are the Defender Series and Parenti Club, which is we call it a club, and as I say, it's not a club. But Defender Series and Parenti vehicles, those started off really as being the largest of the groups. But also the Range Rover. So I put Range Rover and Discovery together, and I can kind of tell you why I did that. But effectively, Range Rovers and Discoveries are together, and Defender Series, and we call it Parenti. Or if you don't know what a Parenti is, I can.
No, actually, that's one of my questions. Finish what you're doing, then we'll ask you can tell me what a Parenti is.
Absolutely. So those 2 groups, Range Rover and Discovery, Defender Series and Parenti, those are about the same size, those 2 groups. And at the moment, each of those has around the 1,800 member mark, and there's some overlap. There's probably quite a lot of overlap. I think it's around 40% of overlap between those 2 groups, which there's a bunch of people that like both. Then there's 2 other groups which have one's for the Ford control vehicles, so things like the Series 2A, 2B Ford controls and the 101s.
Ford controls are cool.
Started that yeah, very cool. We started that group purely because there was interest in them, and there seems to be quite a lot of them around New Zealand. That, when I say a lot, that they're actually relatively rare, but there's a lot of people that want to get information about them. So that's good. And then of course there's the Freelander group. So Freelanders, and I put Discovery Sports and Evokes into the Freelander group as well. And so we've actually ended up with those 4 groups, and the 2 main ones are the Range Rover and Discovery and the Defender Series and Parenti group. So
what's a Parenti or Parenti?
Right, the Parenti. Well, so there's a reason why I put Parenti in the name, and actually, a Parenti is really just a 110. It's really not that much different from a standard 110. But it's an Australian Army version. So they came out of the Australian Army. They're still selling them at auction, by the way, in Australia. And a number of these vehicles have made their way to New Zealand. And so we could have just said Defender and Series. Effectively, they're really a Defender. But I specifically included the name, effectively so that Google searches could find it. A number of these vehicles in New Zealand now, and there's a large Australian group that specifically deals with Parenti vehicles. And generally, the owners of those vehicles, even if they're in New Zealand, would probably really only join the Australian group if they didn't realize that there was a New Zealand group for them. So that's why I included it in the name, just to make sure that the searchers can find it. If you search for us, you'll come up with it. If you search for Parenti, you'll come up with us. So that was the idea, really. If you look up the Parentis, though, they're a very interesting vehicle. They're as I say, a Land Rover 110, but they have an Isuzu engine, a galvanized chassis from the factory, which is very handy. They also make a 6x6 version. So if you look up particularly the Parenti parakeet and things like that, you can Google for this. Parenti, by the way, in Australia is actually a lizard. So a lot of people call these trucks lizards. And 6x6 version. We had one recently on a group trip that we ran, and boy, is that a nice truck, I can tell you.
Ticking a lot of boxes there. You get 6x6, the galvanized chassis, 110, X military, and a
Isuzu diesel engine as well, which is incredibly reliable. So
I don't think we've seen any of those here in North America.
You do have a few. There are some there actually, and they're all right-hand drive, obviously.
They have appeared at the Winter Romp and at the OVLR birthday party. Yeah, there's a couple in Connecticut, for example.
So I know you're not a club, but we're going to use the word club because that just makes life easy, right?
Yep. Go for
so, do you guys have events? Do you go trail riding? Do you have car shows? What kind of things do you guys sponsor or manage or coordinate?
Absolutely. So we run events, and events have actually ended up being kind of the biggest part of what we do. So it's actually quite a lot of organization to run events as well. And I've hit on this idea of trying to get other people to help out and do the organization so that I don't have to do everything. But it quite often lands down to me to actually run the event as it happens. But we get together. We have get-togethers and things like drinks evenings and so on and so forth. But the main thing really is when we get together for particularly a 2-day event, which we've got one coming up actually later on in March. We have 21st, 22nd of March. We have a large event that we've currently organised. We've got 36 vehicles attending at the moment. That's enough. We could have it larger, but we had to cut it off because as soon as you run 2 convoys, and it's pretty hard to keep control of a large convoy, it ends up being quite a lot of management to keep hold of. We've got that on the way, and we ran this last year as well, and it's been a fantastic event. And other things that we do around the country, just getting together and going off-road, on-road. A lot of the stuff we do actually is on-road rather than off-road, and part of the reason for that is sort of insurance requirements and health and safety and so on and so forth. So we're very mindful of that. We can do off-roading events, and we have done so plenty of times, but we generally run that in combination with a real 4-wheel drive club and someone that can cover us for insurance purposes and so on and so forth, because it's easier to do that than to have our own. Because we're not a club, we don't have any membership fees or anything. We can't afford to pay for things like that. So, we don't charge our members for membership or anything. So we're better off running things, under the auspices of someone else that can do that can cover us for that. And that's quite a big requirement. We've had things that have happened in the past in New Zealand where bad things have happened on off-roading trips, and vehicles have had to be pulled out after several days, or people that have started fires that have been costly to put out and so on and so forth. And, that kind of thing is the sort of thing we're trying to avoid. So, yeah, we're pretty mindful of that.
Never get into any trouble going off-road. It never happens.
Never happens. Absolutely never happens. No, of course not. Absolutely. There's another side to this, though, which, and this is where, I think as a group we get to be quite unique, but there's also a public perception side of things. You end up with, although, we don't necessarily cause anything, the public thinks we do. And very often that's not something that we want to have. We've had incidents where the public have complained about all these horrible 4-wheel drivers ripping up the countryside and tearing around the beaches and so on and so forth. And we just want to make sure that that's not us, and that if it is us, we're doing it under controlled circumstances, and that people are well informed, and that we don't, we're environmentally friendly and have a light footprint and so on and so forth. So
tell me more about this March event that you have. Is this like the main one of the year?
It's become probably one of our bigger ones of the year, and it's become extremely popular. So last year we ran it a little bit later in April. We were intending to run it in February, but the conditions in the area that we're running it in were so incredibly dry that it was an extreme fire risk. And so we actually cancelled that one last year and ran it in April instead. Running it a little bit earlier this year, hoping that the conditions will be better. I think they probably will be, and hopefully we'll get slightly better weather as well. Yeah, it's in a place called Akaroa, which, by the way, is New Zealand's only French settlement. And it's going to go for 2 days all around the peninsula there, which will be excellent. There's a number of local farmers have allowed us to come onto their land and do various things. And essentially just a lot of back roads and local farms and bits of off-roading that normally you wouldn't get to see, that nobody really gets to see. Even the clubs don't get to see that sort of stuff.
Is this a camping event?
There will be camping, but the overnight is actually in a town where there is a campsite, and we've sort of informed people that camping is probably the best idea, but they can do anything they want. They can do up to a luxury B&B if they want to. It's up to them.
This sounds a lot like some of the events that we attend here in North America, where you'll have camping.
I'll have to come.
Oh, absolutely. You're certainly invited. We'll take care of you. There's a number of events, as our listeners know. We talk about them all the time, but it sounds a lot similar to what we do. I guess then you go off road. Do you do any RTV, some technical competitions or anything along those lines?
We don't run those ourselves, and as I say, the insurance aspect of that is a little bit difficult in New Zealand. It's something that I think possibly we're in a certain situation in this country where you end up with difficulties with authorities, I guess, if you cause trouble, and it's one of those things that we don't want to do. But what we end up with is the ability to organise those kind of things through other clubs, and I've very often run a NZLRF. Sorry, I'll try to say the American Z rather than the New Zealand Z.
You're fine. Don't worry about it. We'd say bonnet and all sorts of things.
Absolutely. So, fair enough. So I've quite often run those events as club events with the local four-wheel drive clubs, which they're generally quite happy to accept us because we have quite a number of vehicles that are prospective joiners, I guess. And generally we have ended up being the way that people have got into four-wheel driving. So quite often you have people that have never been off-road in their lives, that have never really experienced an off-road trip, and they'll get out with us and they'll go, hey, that was really cool. Where can I get more? And then you end up pushing them into a four-wheel drive club. And then the four-wheel drive clubs can run those kind of events and that sort of stuff. So that's where, I guess we're kind of the entry level. We're the entry to that sort of activity. So
what we would call a gateway drug.
That's it. Gateway drug. We're a gateway drug. Yep. Absolutely.
Do you have other events then that go on throughout the year that are also gateway drugs?
Gateway. I suppose yes, we do. Really. I mean, one of the things that I've tried to do is to get these sort of drinks evenings going throughout the evenings, days, whatever, sort of throughout the country, and we've run several of them now, which have been pretty successful. Some of them perhaps more successful than others. It's a little disappointing sometimes when the weather cries people off, and we had one recently where a number of people actually just couldn't even get there because the rain was so bad, despite the fact they had Land Rovers, and the flooding was terrible and just people couldn't get through, that kind of stuff. And two people ended up going to the pub. That was all we ended up with. Once in a while, we get together and we have sort of 30 or 40 people get together at a pub somewhere and just generally talk about Land Rovers, and wander around the car park and look at everybody's vehicles and watch everybody else oogling from the sidelines thinking, wow, this is pretty cool, how do I get into it? That
sounds very familiar.
That's probably the main gateway drug we have.
Do people in New Zealand stop and talk to you about your truck if you're getting fuel, or you stop at a grocery store and they like, oh, I gotta have one of those, or that's really cool, or you're driving on the wrong side of the road? We get that a lot.
Yeah, we get that. And then we get the what is that?
What is that? Yeah, you probably would get that more in North America than here. I think reasonably common here, Land Rovers, and there's quite a few around, sort of on the roads. But also, I can go down my local supermarket, and there's probably two parked in the car park already. I drive a Range Rover myself, so it's possibly not as much that sort of question for me. If you drove a Perenti, though, I would say you'd probably get that quite a lot. People would get a lot more interested. What is interesting, though, is the Land Rover wave. We get that on the roads quite a lot. Land Rovers wave to each other, and I do the same in the P38, in my P38, and I don't get any waves back unless I flash at them as well. So.
So that tradition also carries on. Range Rover people don't acknowledge other Land Rovers.
That tradition does carry on, although I find it more successful if you flash first. You flash first and then you wave. Yeah, that sort of works for me. So,
how many fingers do they hold up when they wave back?
That varies a little. It depends. If I've made a mistake and actually accidentally flashed a G-Wagon coming the other way, then they might hold up one. So sometimes it's a little hard to tell from a distance.
Do New Zealanders use the two fingers the British do, or the one finger that the rest of the world uses?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably a bit of a variation, bit of both. I think generally the two fingers is probably about as much as you want to take. You don't want to take more than three fingers off the steering wheel at a time, do you? So, that's about it, especially if you're driving a series.
So this March event, you said, is at the only French settlement. Does that mean do they speak French there?
Well, some people do. There's quite a lot of French-speaking people still there, but it's an interesting one because it's a nice little place. They've got sort of little French flags everywhere. There's all the street names are French. The police station is the gendarmerie, various things like that. So
did not know that about New Zealand.
Yeah, there's only the one.
So then instead of Kiwis, they'd be wee-wees.
Yeah. Okay, I'll mention that next time I'm in Akaroa and see what they say.
Maybe on your way out of town.
Yeah, maybe on my way out might be a good idea. Yeah, that's it.
That's pretty good, actually. That's pretty good.
That's pretty good. I'll let them know.
Where we are in northeastern United States, there's a heavy French influence that's left over from 250 years ago. So there's still a little bit of French place names, those kinds of things.
Sure.
And of course,
this was France until the Brits and the Scots came in and ran them off.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Yes.
And it's interesting you say 250 years ago as well, because that's more than our history here. I mean, apart from the local the Maori history, you've got not even 250 years of history in New Zealand. The sort of what we call Pākehā, which is the Maori word for white people, didn't settle New Zealand until sort of 1700s, late 1700s, really. So
there was the 1760 and the Great War of Empire, and I know people on the podcast probably heard me talk about that a lot. But this is where Pittsburgh is where what I believe to be the First World War started.
It's where the action was.
Indeed.
Right. Okay. It's where of course it is. Yeah.
George Washington himself traveled over these over the lands here in this area, and of course up in Canada, Dixon has to deal with the Quebecois. So they've got a whole province there of French people.
Yeah, where English is not legal.
English is not legal.
Well, they started settling.
It is legal.
They started settling Quebec in the mid 16th century.
Yeah,
so
Quebec City is
a long time.
Yeah, Quebec City is the oldest. I think it's the oldest continuous town in North America. It celebrated its 400th anniversary about 10 years ago now.
Wow, 400 years.
Yes,
that's
at the mouth of the St. Lawrence Seaway.
Absolutely, that's more than anything we have here. So there you go.
And it still has a very European feel to it. The old town, Vieux, Quebec, has that
nice.
Kind of European, old timey. If you can use that as a word, timey. But anyway, we should move on from those historical things. But what's the terrain like in New Zealand for off-roading? Right. It sounds a little bit like what it is here in our part of North America. But are there other? What's it like for those maybe who have not experienced it?
Not experienced it. So there's a lot of variation actually. New Zealand probably is pretty well known for its mountain scenery, especially mountains and bush. A lot of people use four-wheel drives for hunting and things like that as well. So there's quite a lot of variation. There's a lot of plains, especially in the South Island, where it's very flat, and then you get to sort of mountainous areas that sort of abut that, and you can go up some of these valleys, and a lot of these valleys are actually, extremely wide. There might be a river which has a bed, not a lot of water flowing in it, but the river bed can be, a couple of miles in width. And, you can go up this kind of stuff. It's very hard on vehicles, actually, because it's full of rocks. But this is the kind of thing where, you can go for miles and miles in that kind of terrain, and, right up river valleys with huge mountains surrounding you, and never see another person, the whole day, which is fantastic. It's really good. That's sort of South Island. North Island stuff, we get sort of perhaps lower mountains, but a lot of what we do is more sort of a little bit closer in, I guess. So, you end up going around little valleys where, you find little nooks and crannies that nobody ever sees, that kind of thing. So I guess down south is sort of more big sky. Up north is more sort of close and personal, I guess, and a little bit more bush, perhaps.
Do you have forests or like tied-in trees, anything like that?
Yeah, that kind of stuff. You quite often get your snorkel whacked off. Those sort of things happen. Right. There's quite a lot of that. And actually, the runs that we do locally, we have what's called the Akatarabwa Forest, which is a huge area which is sort of multi-use. So it's used by bikers and horse riders and four-wheel drivers all together. And that kind of area has got a sort of huge variation in terrain where you can get up quite high and look down on the scenery down below, but you also end up sort of down low. You can end up stuck in the bush, and it's extremely hard to get through. So just a massive variation there, which it's actually really good for four-wheel driving. It's fantastic, and it's as I say, it's a shared use area. I'd have to check on the size of that area, but I mean, you could spend days in there and get lost. So, it's quite large. There's those kind of areas throughout New Zealand. Actually, up north and around the Auckland region, there's quite a lot of really good tracks around and trails around there as well, which are closed in bush. But you also get out to beach scenery, and driving on the beach is quite common. People often say here that a beach is actually a state highway. We quite often use the beaches as state highways, and it's not quite true, but they are legal roads here. So you can generally drive on a beach as long as it's not privately owned. So
what's the sand like? I assume it's not the beach sand that you typically think of, the very fine sand, I guess it's more pea gravel. Am I right?
Yes, well, that varies as well. Actually, do you know what? Sand is the bane of my life. I keep getting stuck in it. I don't know how to drive in it. I still can't get it right. It's possibly a result of the fact that I drive a P38 and it's got the traction control instead of all the manual controls. So it just doesn't work in sand. It's hopeless. But
until the traction control breaks, and then you're on your own.
Well, that's right. You're not even in four-wheel drive if that happens. So yes, exactly. But it's a bit of a hard one. But it does vary. Here on the south coast, I'm on the south coast of the North Island, and it's quite coarse sand and very very loose and and reasonably deep as well. So you've got to stay above the high tide line, because if you don't and you get stuck, you might be there until the tide comes in, and that's not what you want. Yeah.
So all in all, it sounds a lot less outbacky than your better known neighbors to the north.
Yeah, I guess we don't really have anything in New Zealand where you can go out for a week and never see anybody. It's very there's very little of that. I mean, we do have in the mountains, but you wouldn't go very far. And I guess the Australians have huge, vast territories, which you can go out in the deserts and go for 1,000 miles and not see another person. We don't really have that here, so we're not quite the same. Like overlanding in New Zealand is not quite as common, because there's not as much land area, obviously. So, by
the way, I think we got a show title out of that. You get your snorkel whacked off.
Yeah, I guess that's one that's something you can use for advertising the podcast.
I was just going to say, for the average person that is listening to the podcast and is not familiar with New Zealand, how much would you describe the landscape and so on that was in Lord of the Rings as being typical of New Zealand, or is that only on one of the islands or something?
And before you answer, is there some sort of New Zealand law or rule that how long it takes a foreigner to bring up Lord of the Rings?
No, there's no real law. It happens all the time, I guess. Yes. So if you want to come to New Zealand, you can't really miss the Lord of the Rings scenery, and actually a lot of that scenery is actually pretty genuine. There's quite a lot of areas in Lord of the Rings that were CGI. Obviously, the mountains in general, the mountains and the forest scenery and so on is pretty real. So if you come here, you can't really miss it. And particularly down south, probably more of the scenery was down south than up north. But there's a lot of it around this area where I am in the Wellington region as well. So yeah, I mean, in terms of laws for foreigners mentioning it, we kind of like it actually when people mention it. It means that people have seen our country already. So yeah, that's quite good. We're actually pretty happy about that. The question was, how can you miss, or do you see the scenery? Is that typical? Yeah, in general, I'd say it's fairly typical of New Zealand. I think it's mainly the mountain and forest scenery, I think, is pretty typical. Yeah.
And snow? I know there was snows in the mountains, but do you get snow down on the lowlands there where most people live?
Yeah, we do. North Island, not so much. We don't really get, so where I am in Wellington, sort of the south of the North Island, I guess, we don't really get much snow. We get a few drops falling, or a few flakes falling, 1 or 2 days in the year, but we don't get a lot. But South Island, yeah, you tend to get quite a lot. Most years it will snow, and down in Christchurch particularly, and further south gets pretty snowy. So actually, one of those I was going to mention one of the bad things that happened about with four-wheel drivers, and it wasn't Land Rovers, thankfully, but it was at one of the four-wheel drive clubs down south a few years ago. Went out in some snow and got stuck on the top of a mountain range and had to leave their vehicles there and had to be retrieved by bulldozers later on. And that was one of the things that people did complain about and called it environmental damage. And how much of that was actually sort of public perception versus reality, I don't know. But that's one of the things where we try and avoid those kind of situations, just purely because we don't want the public to feel like we are kind of doing environmental damage. So, but yeah, that most certainly does happen, especially in the middle of winter. And those guys, they really didn't look at the forecast, went out anyway and got stuck in it. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that happens sometimes.
When you have your events, is it strictly a Land Rover community, or do you also allow other makes?
It's pretty strictly Land Rovers, actually. I've had people, and I've had someone just recently actually saying, I'm a Land Rover guy, but my Land Rover's not working. Is it okay if I bring my Pajero? And I'm going, well, not really. I actually don't mind. I wouldn't mind, and I'm sure most people wouldn't mind if people did. But I think as soon as you do that sort of thing, what's going to end up happening is you end up being a general four-wheel drive club, and that's probably not something that I want to be. I don't want to run that. I don't really want to be organising events for all and sundry. And I think keeping it to Land Rovers is, apart from the interest factor and the fact that we all think Land Rovers are cool, it's the sort of thing where it's just an awful lot of organisation for a lot of people that I don't really have that much of an interest in. I think it's probably better just to keep it to Land Rover. Having said that, one of our best trip leaders in the local region here, who runs extremely good trips, he knows all the routes and all the tracks and all that sort of stuff, and he doesn't have a Land Rover. He drives a Prado. I'm quite happy to use him as a trip leader purely for his knowledge, and I don't actually care what he drives. So very often we end up with the Prado on our trips locally. We do tend to tease him, though. I have some spare Land Rover badges, and I tend to stick them onto his truck with a bit of blue tack at the start of a trip, so everybody thinks he's a Land Rover.
Good man. Good man.
We have a friend in our local club that drives a Nissan, Nextera, very much the same kind of guy. We like having him with us because he's a great photographer, but yeah, we tease him about not having a Land Rover. However, he did tear off the independent front suspension and put a solid axle and leaf springs under it. So we tell him he's piece by piece turning it into a series truck.
Well done.
What makes of off-road vehicles are there in New Zealand? I mean, obviously there's Land Rovers, but do you get Jeeps? Do you get Mercedes? What's the market like, I guess?
You mentioned Mercedes there. I haven't really seen too many Mercedes doing off-roading. I mean, obviously the Mercedes, there's a few G-Wagons about, but I haven't really seen them off-road. Mostly here, I think we get the Japanese 4x4s, so the Nissans, the Prados, the Pajeros, that sort of stuff. There's a lot of those vehicles. There's a huge market in New Zealand for pre-owned, I guess, Japanese import vehicles, which are incredibly cheap. So they're extremely easy to get hold of, and a lot of people have them. And, Hiluxes, that kind of thing as well. Very often they've been, pre-used in Japan, and they come over here. Then it might not be the best quality, but people just want to run about, something that they can bash around and they don't care too much about. So nice and easy for them to do that. And, we end up with a lot of those sort of vehicles.
What are the New Zealand import laws like?
Reasonably tough. I mean, unless you're actually a dealer, it's very, very hard to get a vehicle here that's less than 25 years old. I think it's 25 years. It might be 20. And I believe this law was changing, and I'm not exactly sure whether it's changed yet or not. But until recently, at the very least, you really had to get a Land Rover if you wanted a Defender imported from overseas, particularly the UK, because that's where their right-hand drive. You needed to get it in under classic vehicle legislation, which really is 20 or 25 years or older. Yep. Either that, or it must have a stability program and so on and so forth. Which then you can import a newer vehicle, but anything in between that doesn't have stability control and is not a classic vehicle, you essentially can't really get it into the country. It's virtually impossible. Yeah, I don't know how that law was going to change, but I believe it was going to be toughened up even more, so it might be even harder to get classic vehicles into the country now as well. And as a result of that, we actually would like to sort of preserve the classic vehicles we do have, and that's sometimes extremely difficult for us, particularly with Land Rovers. You end up with, when people want to sell, they end up putting a price on that kind of expects an overseas buyer to come in and snap it up, and that kind of prices New Zealanders out of the market very often. That's a big problem for us, actually, and it's something that we need to figure out what to do, but there's very little that we can do about it, really.
Parts widely available, easy to obtain for Land Rovers?
Yes, we've got several local parts dealers, actually, which, I quite often they get recommended on the group, parts and servicing, obviously, as well, and there's plenty of specialists around. Enough to cover the country, I guess. It's very often a question of, who should I buy parts from, or, where should I take my vehicle for servicing, or whatever. And generally group members will answer that sort of question, so that's fine. But parts of the country are better covered than others. And, I guess you have to look around as well. Auckland, obviously, being the biggest city, has got plenty, loads there. you go out in the middle of the countryside, you head out towards, Gisborne and eastern North Island, or even the southern South Island and places like that. It's a little harder to find a dealership that specializes. But generally parts are available, and a lot of our purchases, if you're doing your work yourself, it's mostly online.
Are you able to get stuff from Australia?
Yeah, we are, but it's actually easiest to get stuff from the UK. It's probably cheapest to get
Really?
stuff from the UK as well. Yeah, we end up importing a lot of things from LR Direct and places like that.
Sure. As far as
yeah.
parts, I could see that, but there's a lot of really cool off-road accessories and aftermarket stuff being made in Australia.
There is, yeah, that's true. There's things like there's obviously the things like the ARB range and so on and so forth, which is fantastic, and we get a lot of those here as well. So yeah, there's a lot of the off-road accessories and the roof racks and so on and so forth.
Right.
One of the things that does disappoint me actually is that I'd like to use the US more, and there's a lot of cool stuff that you guys get, and I look at particularly I don't know whether I'm allowed to name names here, but I look at particularly things like the Voyager rack systems, and I like those a lot, and I think they're really cool. The cost of getting them here though from the US is just extortionate, and actually it's cheaper from the UK, so we're actually better off. It's really a lot of the time it's the cost of shipping those things, and Australia's good, but yeah, UK is generally mostly where we source those sort of things from.
Interesting. Couldn't be any farther away from you, and yet it's
exactly. You would have thought it would be the worst deal, but yeah, generally it only takes a week to arrive as well, so it's not too bad.
What about series trucks? Are there a lot there in New Zealand? Are they coveted? Were they used for farming like they did in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's actually a lot of them. There's a lot of enthusiasts about them as well, which there's a lot of people restoring them, and some of them are absolutely pristine. I have a running group that I go on Saturdays with, and I turn up to this running group, and there's a 1949 Series 1 that turns up with the guy that goes running, and it's in absolutely pristine, stunningly, beautifully restored condition. It's really, really lovely. There's a couple of those actually that I've seen around town as well, and I quite often don't know who the owners are. Sometimes they're in our group, sometimes they're not. But the Series 1s especially are very, very coveted here, and even the Series 2s and Series 3s, absolutely, they were used by farmers for years, and many of them still are. That's probably one of the best vehicles for farming that there ever has been. So there's a lot of the farms do still use them. Yeah, there's a lot of them around.
What's the crime situation? Do they steal Defenders and series trucks as badly as they do in the UK?
It's not as much here. Actually, that's sort of a good thing for us. We'd rather keep it out. It does go on. We've had a few that have been reported over the years, but I can count, probably on the fingers of one hand, the ones that I know about since our group has been going. And I don't think it's a huge problem at this point. And I think also, I mentioned the Japanese 4x4s earlier on. I think those probably in many ways are, probably more targeted and more sought after in some ways, just purely because people know that they can on-sell them quickly or strip them for parts and sell them quickly, and they don't have a relatively small market to deal with. So, it's probably those are more targeted for crime than Land Rovers are, which is good.
It's a good problem. That's what I like about living here in the States is that the car thieves don't even know what they are, so they're not going to take them.
That's right. Yep.
It's the most stolen vehicle in the UK, and it's the least stolen vehicle here.
And actually, that's the other thing is I drive a P38 Range Rover, which, as I say, it's one of the most maligned Land Rovers in the range, and
right. So if it gets stolen, it won't get far.
Well, I mean, there is that. There's also the fact that people see them as problematic anyway, even if they're not. And I think the P38 takes a certain amount of knowledge to understand it and
takes
to really
a special guy to want to do it.
It does, and a lot of these people, they might take it for a joyride, but they're not out to steal it for parts or anything. It's not that sort of vehicle. So, really, to me, it's not really a problem. I can park the P38 anywhere and be relatively comfortable that it's safe, and I think actually Defenders here generally are pretty safe as well. So,
what's the fuel type that is preferred?
Absolutely, we have. So yeah, I suppose petrol's probably more preferred than anything. So we do use standard. I mean, I guess you say gasoline. We call it gasoline. Mostly the sort of 95 and 98 sort of octane level, that sort of thing. We do sell 91. Most people probably wouldn't run their Rovers on that. There is a lot of diesel around as well. So yeah, the diesel vehicles, but probably the petrol's more common.
What does fuel cost over there?
Right, that's oh yeah, okay. Now here we have a question. Yes, it varies throughout the country, but actually we're paying. And by the way, we work on liters, so I don't know how that works out to gallons.
We can do the math.
About 3.8.
3.8, something like that. So at the moment, we're paying around $2.15, $2.20 per liter. Okay. Oh, and actually, when I think about that, so actually I mentioned 91 versus 95 and 98. So it's funny because the fuel stations here actually only advertise the price of 91, even though it's not what you use generally.
Right.
And most people, and that's sort of their way, I guess, of getting around the laws. But
we get that here.
You do get that there. So actually, the 95 and 98 ends up being more expensive, and so for me, it can be around sort of $2.35, $2.40, something like that per liter.
So 8.5 a gallon then.
Something like that. What's your cost? I don't know. But
while Harold tells you that, I'm going to find out what a New Zealand dollar is in American.
Yeah, I think it's about 1 to 1.7 or something. I can't remember exactly.
So we did the math. We paused the podcast, dear listeners, and it looks like it's $5 American for 1 gallon of gasoline in New Zealand.
And how does that compare with your own prices, if I may ask?
That would be $2 more here in the Pittsburgh area for the upper high test top of the line gasoline, and that's usually what diesel costs. Also, is usually about the same price as the premium gasoline.
Sure. Our premium would be equivalent to your 98 octane. We have a slightly different system.
Right. Interesting as well that you mentioned diesel, because diesel here is actually cheaper. The reason for that is that diesel vehicles are required to pay an extra road tax as well, which we call it road user charges, and it's a per kilometer tax. Essentially, and you pay that once every 6 months or something. I can't remember. I don't have a diesel vehicle, so I'm not sure. But so the fuel itself is cheaper, but because you pay this extra tax, the total running cost for vehicles really depends on how many kilometers you do. It's because diesel vehicles historically, I guess, were seen as more of a commercial. It's more of a commercial fuel than gasoline. But nowadays that's not so much the case, and plenty of private people have it. But we've still got the tax. They're not going to take that away in a hurry. So,
correct me if I'm wrong, Dixon. That's about the same price as you would pay in Canada for fuel, right?
A little bit more than in Canada.
I'm not actually surprised that we're more expensive either, because we do have quite high taxes on fuel here, and US historically has been quite reasonably cheap for fuel. I always thought. I mean, I know you guys probably don't feel that, but
it depends on where you live.
By comparison, we have it pretty easy. That's for certain.
Sure.
And like where Pittsburgh is, they always the gas prices, the fuel prices are always the highest in the general area, because you're at the end of the pipeline. Like, okay, thanks, appreciate that.
Well, yes, there's that, and all the taxes. We pay more in taxes for fuel than most other states.
True, there is that, but there's a number of reasons, but they always like to throw that one out about you're at the end of the pipeline. Like, okay. That should really mean, because most of the Pittsburgh fuel comes from New Jersey. That's where the processing is done, at least that's my understanding. They'll bring it, pipelines come partway across the state, and then they put it by truck or something like that, and it's like, we're at the end of the pipeline. Okay.
Yeah, we get that a lot. We're the end of the pipeline as well, and I don't really know whether it's a pipeline or no. There's no real pipeline that I know of. It's more of a ship line, I guess.
Yes. I think New Zealand's kind of on the end of the pipeline for everything on a global standpoint.
Well, that's true. It's a good thing that with fuel in particular, we do have some of our own resources as well. But we are generally on the end of the pipeline for most things, which puts the price of things here can go pretty high. Yeah.
Is there a rivalry between other makes and the Land Rover makes, or does everybody kind of get along? There's a big rivalry here in the States, typically between Jeeps and everybody else, and they barely know us Land Rover people, and the Land Rover people.
The Land Rover people are kind of crabby because they're getting tired of their Land Rovers being called Jeeps, so there's that side of the rivalry too.
So the rivalry exists here, and I think the rivalry is real, but also I think there's a lot of pragmatic people that realize that actually Jeeps are a pretty good vehicle too. So we're not entirely rivals, but I think the rivalry is more it's more along the lines of teasing each other rather than real rivalry. Once you get out on the tracks together, everybody's together and happy. But
do you get actual Jeeps in New Zealand?
Yeah. There's plenty of Jeeps around. Yeah, actually, I had to thank a Jeep driver for getting me out of the Akatarawa forest one day when my alternator died, and several jump starts later, we managed to get out of the forest. But it was only thanks to him and his deep cycle battery that we managed to do that. So. Yeah, I guess I was pretty lucky there, but it goes both ways, and Land Rovers very often recover the Jeeps. I guess the bigger rivalry almost is probably with Toyota in a way, just purely because there's so many of them. So yeah, that's quite a big one.
You're familiar, I assume, with the Top Gear destroying a Hilux several times over, and it.
Well, or failing to destroy it.
Failing to destroy, although I think there was a little bit of what do you call the word? But it was a little bit contrived, that series of episodes. But absolutely, right. I'm familiar with that. Yeah, sure.
They are definitely hard to kill. Put it that way.
They're very hard to kill. I hesitate to suggest what would happen if you tried the same thing with a Land Rover. It depends on what sort of Land Rover you chose. I guess if you had an old series vehicle, most of them have probably been through that several times over, and they're still fine.
Yeah.
But if you did that with a modern L405 Range Rover,
not when you implode a building and have it drop that far.
That's right. I don't think that would work. Right. Not really.
Leaving it out at high tide. I mean, Land Rovers are used to having water in them. That's not a problem.
That's right. That's not a problem. It'll be a problem like 5 years down the line when they rust, but or even a year down the line when they rust. But it's a common thing for them. So, it's not just Land Rovers. I mean, I had a friend that brought his two cars back from Saudi Arabia when he worked there, and one of them was a Mazda, and apparently a crane driver in Marseille in France dropped it off the end of the wharf, and it spent 3 days underwater before they fished it out and sent it back to New Zealand.
Oops.
Drove around on the roads here for another 10 years, and it was fine. So
well, there you go. Well. There's a good marketing story for Mazda, right?
For Mazda, yeah. Okay, how the club started. So really, I didn't actually start it, interestingly. So the club was actually started, we'll call it a club, as you say. It was started
It's easier. It's just easier.
It's easier. It's just easier. We call it forums. We call it a set of forums, and that's probably more of an accurate description. But it was started by a guy called David Lee Archer, and he's down in the South Island. He's actually British, but he works here in New Zealand. He's a dairy farm manager. He had a P38 Range Rover, and he started this group for them to try and get a little bit of I don't know, I guess a bit of advice and parts, sort of and advice from other people. And the club bimbled along, and I think it had 6 members or something when I joined it. It wasn't huge, and this was in relatively early days, so this was 2015. And I joined the group because I had a P38 Range Rover, obviously, and got to talk to David and got to know him a little bit, and everything seemed fine. And then David went and plunged his P38 into one of those large rivers that I talked about earlier on, with a lot of very little water in it, but a lot of rocks, and went through the main riverbed, I guess, and hydraulicked his engine, and that was the end of his P38. I said to David, well, I suppose you'll be wanting someone to take over the group then, and he said, yeah. So I took over the group. He made me an admin, and this is on Facebook, as I say. So
wait a minute,
not a Facebooker.
So his truck was toast, and he was out. He didn't get anything else. He was done.
No. The story continues.
Okay.
So he made me an admin, and this was a group specifically for P38s. But David went off, and he bought himself an L322. So I said to David, well, you might as well stay in the group, and we'll make it the P38 and L322 group. So we did that, and then it sort of expanded from there, really. So after a while, I sort of said to him, well, there's a lot of people wanting to make posts about classic Range Rovers. Why don't we just incorporate those, because we're not going to be able to keep them out. We can't stop them. We can't say to people, no, we don't like classic Range Rovers. We might as well have them in as well. So we did. And then after a while, I said, well, you know what? A Discovery is pretty much the same vehicle as most of these Range Rovers. So why don't we incorporate Discoveries? And And we ended up with the Range Rover and Discovery group, and that's really where it became, that's where it began. During all this time, I was doing a lot of sort of promotion on other groups, which is nowadays seen as a little bit, you don't do that anymore, but in those days that's what we did, trying to do things like distributing leaflets on vehicles and so on. So we did this for a little while, and then realized that actually business cards are a better option. So we ended up with business cards, which we distribute on Range Rovers and Discoveries all around the country, and I got group members doing that as well. So it started to build from there. But after a while, of course, I had the same problem as I did with classic Range Rovers, that people started wanting to make posts about Defenders and series vehicles. I thought, no, I'm not letting this happen. I'm going to draw the line there. And I guess this is part of the philosophy behind the whole thing, and the reason why it's been so successful is because, we've stayed relatively focused on what we were, and what I felt was that Defender and series vehicles were a different kind of community. They're a different set of people from Range Rover and Discovery owners. And you can agree or disagree with that, but where you disagree with it, there's no harm in those people who own both being a member of both groups. So I started a Defender and series group just really to take the posts away from the Range Rover and Discovery group, and then you end up, of course, with two groups with separate topics. But if people want to be a member of both, they can be a member of both, no problem at all. That sort of tootled along for a little while, and I think both groups ended up with probably about 300 members. And there was a rival group actually called Land Rover Owners New Zealand, which have started before us. There ended up being a little bit of a race for membership between them and our Defender and series group, round about through the 400 member mark, where both of us were gaining members at an incredible rate, and people started joining. And I think we had the edge really because we were distributing business cards and so on, and promoting the group reasonably heavily, and we ended up with more members than them, and the competition kind of tailed off after a little while. So we sort of shot past them in a way. After a while, I also thought, well, Freelanders are a Land Rover. Why are we not incorporating these somewhere? But they don't really fit into either of these two groups. We might as well start a group for Freelanders, and if
they don't really fit in anywhere.
They don't fit in anywhere, but if you create your own group for them, then they fit in. And I thought, well, there's a lot of groups internationally where Freelanders are dumbed down quite badly, and I feel like people are a bit unfriendly to them. They tend to say bad things and so on and so forth. And I thought, no, we're not going to be like that. I'd rather be friendly with those people and incorporate them and get them to come on our trips and so on and so forth. So we ended up with a Freelander group. It hasn't been hugely successful, I have to say, because I don't really know why, but I think Freelander owners possibly are not as this might be a bit of a sweeping statement, but I feel like Freelander owners are perhaps not as invested in their vehicles as Range Rover or Defender owners. I'm not really sure why it is. They see it as more of just a car rather than a Land Rover. I'm not sure why that is, but I wanted to incorporate those people anyway, and we've actually got some very good Freelander owners that have been on our trip and on our group trips, and we've
see
really
here in North America, we can count on our hand how many Freelanders are left in North America. It's like,
oh really?
We're up to like eight. I think we've seen 8. I meant to tell you guys, I saw a new one in the last couple weeks around the Pittsburgh area. I saw a Freelander I don't recall seeing before. Yeah, it was a 5-door, bright red.
There we go.
You sure it wasn't an existing one that's just been repainted?
Or had been moved from one place to another.
Been moved, yeah, taken off its flat tire. Interestingly as well, I kind of wanted to bring into that group that I saw as being sort of similar, and so the Discovery Sport ended up being in that group as well, and I guess that was really the replacement for the Free. And I also, by the way, the LR2 is what you say in America for the Freelander 2, because we have the Freelander 2. I think it's the same as what you call the LR2.
Correct.
Right.
The Range Rover Evoque into that group, because I saw the Evoque as being a smaller vehicle. Start that sentence over. So I put Evoques in Evoques. Should I say Evoque? How many times do you want me to say that? I put them there.
How do you say Evoque? Is it Evoque or Evoque?
Well, it's like with a K in it. We say it with the Evoque, like with a K, but I guess it sounds a bit like Ewok. Maybe that's closer to what they are. But I mean, to me, they have more in common with that group, with the Freelanders and the Discovery Sports, than they do really with the Range Rovers and Discoveries. So I put them in the Freelander group because I felt that was the right place for them, and that seems to have been okay. That seems to have worked out. Interestingly, I went looking for the Landwind X7. I don't know if you know about the Landwind X7. Has anybody heard?
The Landwind's Chinese cherry, right?
No, it's actually its own brand. It's not a Cherry. It's not a Geely. You know, my wife is Chinese, so I get to go reasonably often. But Landwind X7 is the one that got copyright issues to the Evoque, whatever you want to call it. And so when I went there in 20, I went hunting for the Landwind X7, and I didn't really find that many of them. I think I saw one on the road in China and where I was in the city that I was in. So I took the liberty of going to the dealership to actually find them, and I got to drive one, which is interesting, and just as a cool thing to do. And I thought, look, should I do this? I'm not sure I should drive it. I just drove it around the car park, so it didn't really matter too much. But
was it any good?
Yes, is in a word. Now I would say it's a good car. It's a pretty good quality vehicle, but it's not a Land Rover. It's definitely not an Evoque, and it's not even trying to be. So, you know, let's be honest. It's two-wheel drive. It's really a very good small car that is built to look like a Land Rover, a Range Rover Evoque. In terms of a vehicle, there's probably nothing wrong with that. In terms of the copyright issues, maybe there is, et cetera, et cetera. But I just felt like it was, you know, it's a pretty ordinary small car. You know, I would buy one if it were available. It isn't in New Zealand, but just interesting that, you know, it became a bit of a focus of topic conversation and a bit of a topic of conversation on our Freelander and Discovery Sport and Evoque group, just purely because people didn't like the copyright issue. So I thought, look, I'll go and drive one and see what it's like. And yeah, I liked it. You know, it's interesting as well. The dealership were quite happy to help. They showed me all about the features of it and so on and so forth. And yeah, let me have a test drive. So I guess I was pretty lucky there. Yeah, that's the Landwind X7. If anyone wants to know about it, I'm probably one of the few Westerners that's ever actually driven one.
What was the materials like? Do you think they were slightly less grade than a normal Land Rover, Range Rover?
No, well, yeah, it probably was less grade. I mean, it's not trying to be a high quality vehicle, and it's also, you know, half the price or less. I think it's about a third of the price. So, you know, it's not really trying to pretend to be something that it isn't, other than with its looks, I guess. And, you know, it had a pretty basic Android touchscreen built into it and so on and so forth. You could set it for English, not that anybody ever really would. You know, it's really only available in China as far as I know. But, you know, I found it a pretty good little car. One thing I should say, of course, is that it fails pretty much every safety review out there. So you're very unlikely to ever see it on the roads in the US, and probably unlikely to see it here either. I believe it passes their own safety standards, though. So, you know, that's kind of okay.
Does it have seatbelts?
It had seatbelts.
Airbags.
It had everything you would expect. It had everything you would expect.
So it's probably better safety-wise than, say, a Series 2.
Yeah, I'd say in terms of Land Rovers, you're probably looking at around about the same safety level as perhaps a Discovery 2. What did you call a Discovery 2? The
Discovery 2.
Discovery 2.
Discovery 2. There you go. It's probably around the same safety level as that. Really, it had airbags.
That's more than I want, so I'm good.
There you go. That's all right then.
Well, that's actually what stopped the Defender from being available here in the U.S.
It is. That's right. So, one thing I should mention, though, of course, is the next step, of course, was people started posting about Ford control vehicles. So I thought, look, a Ford control group is probably going to go down quite well here. And I created a spreadsheet on Google Docs as well for all of the Ford control vehicles in New Zealand. So we have a register of them and so on as well. So
are there
actually,
many?
I think we have around 30 on the register, but there's probably more around that we don't know about yet, and I can't remember exactly. I'd have to look it up.
I think that's more than North America has.
That's impressive for a country of your size.
That is quite impressive. We probably got quite a few of the 101s. Actually, it's interesting as well because there was a photo that went up on one of the groups about 101s being used on a farm somewhere up north in Auckland, and I don't know exactly where it was. But this guy who was the farmer had 4 of them. 3 of them were just purely parked up and used entirely as parts truck for the 4th one, as parts vehicles for the 4th one.
That's how you do it.
Typical Land Rover
was his
owner.
crop sprayer. That was it. The 4th one was his crop sprayer, and that was what he was using it for. And he just wanted to keep that going, so he bought up several of them. And
because you can.
Because you can. And at the time, I guess they were probably cheap, but not now. Yeah, I have a friend that owns one down south in Christchurch, and I've been in that and had a ride in that as well. So
cool.
Yeah.
Did he convert it to like a
cool.
sleeper, or is it just a standard?
No, he uses it pretty much as a utility vehicle on his farm, but it's also, he's a little bit into Land Rovers and tanks and military vehicles generally and that sort of stuff as well. So, he's kind of kept it as a preserved vehicle, but he uses it in anger and in real situations on his farm.
So he uses it to drag cannons around through the fields?
That kind of stuff, yeah. I mean, he had, until recently, actually, he had a tank. He had a Rolls-Royce Centurion tank on his farm as well. So, but that's that's apparently gone now.
That'll plow the field nicely.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it apparently did. Apparently he used to take it for a run around the farm once a year. It costs $400 to do that, so he doesn't want to do it too often.
And probably fuel and maintenance alone. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Does the New Zealand military use Land Rovers?
Well, they did, and there's quite a lot of military Land Rovers around. And one of our trips last year, I think the year before, and I want to run it again this year as well, we went up to the central North Island. There is a military base, or one of the largest military bases in New Zealand, where you can go and have a tour. They actually have a museum there, which is a great museum. No Land Rovers in the museum, but if you ask very nicely and mention that you're from New Zealand Land Rover forums or other military organisations as well, I guess, they will take you for a tour out the back onto the actual base itself. We spent a whole day out there last time just looking at everything that they had, including their Land Rovers. They've got a collection of vehicles out there, which is a really interesting collection. There's military ambulances and so on and so forth. There's Land Rovers that were used in the Bosnian conflict, and they're painted white, of course, because they were UN vehicles at the time, and so on and so forth. So there's quite a few of those up there, and there's also a Land Rover that was used as the Queen's vehicle when she visited New Zealand twice, I think, and it's a Series 2, I believe. I think it was in 1971 and 75 or 77 or something when she visited, and it's still in beautiful pristine condition with red carpet in the back and so on, and I've been and stood in the back where the Queen stood, so absolutely.
Well, you just never know when she might show up again, so you got to keep it around.
You never know. We'll reserve that thought.
And she could actually drive it and possibly repair it too.
That's very true. She was a mechanic.
So Greg, let's hear about you and how did you get to disease? How did you get into Land Rovers? What was maybe your first truck or first memory?
First memory, I suppose. First memory. I guess we had a family friend that had a Land Rover on their farm, and it was a Series 2, and I kind of got the bug then, and I always thought I'd like to buy a Land Rover. I just thought they were the world's most useful. Probably the most useful vehicle. That, if you ever needed a bug-out vehicle, well, you couldn't go past a Land Rover, really, could you? I mean, it's the sort of thing that if the apocalypse hits, an old series will keep on going, and you're not going to get affected by EMP or bad fuel or all of the kind of things that the series will just take that and run with it.
Yes, but poisons will get easily into the cabin.
They will. That's very true. You'd have to do some sealing. But I never actually managed to get one until, I suppose, when did I first get? I can't remember, but I actually bought a Discovery 2, and I'd been living 10 years in the UK. And I never got one there, and I still really wanted one, but I just, the UK motorways, I didn't have the right sort of job for getting out on the weekends and doing that sort of stuff. So, I wasn't really I couldn't really get into it there. And when I came back here, and I spent 2 years in Australia as well, and I had a company car there. They gave me a Hilux. So there was kind of no need to buy a Land Rover. And then when I moved back to New Zealand, I bought this Discovery 2, and fantastic vehicle, which, I kind of wanted to keep it and wanted to hold on to it, but I didn't in the end, partly because I wanted to have a trip back to the UK for a month, and I needed the money. So although I'd taken it out off-roading and done a little bit of stuff to it and sort of done a bit of upkeep and so on and so forth, I really wanted to have this trip. So I thought, okay, well, I'll sell it. And I ended up going off to the UK for a month. When I came back, I realized I still had enough money and I didn't need to sell it at all. And I was extremely disappointed with myself. So I ended up looking at...
Now, you see, you can tell a Land Rover person because they get rid of the vehicle and they immediately regret it.
That's right. That's exactly how it happened with me. And it's funny
with a lot of brands, you get buyer's remorse, but with Land Rovers, you get seller's remorse.
Seller's remorse. That's it. You do, and yeah, I had that. I had exactly that, and I felt like I'd kind of done myself down. I didn't need to do this. I was single. I was on my own at the time, and so on. And I sort of felt like I really wanted a Land Rover. I really wanted to join the clubs and do stuff with it. So I started looking around at them again and trying to find another Discovery Series 2, and didn't really find one that suited me very well. But I sort of thought, maybe I should expand the search a little bit and include Range Rovers because what do they look like? What can you get for your money? And what I discovered was that the Range Rovers, the P38s in particular, which are in some ways virtually the same car. I mean, they have the same V8 engine and so on and so forth. And I started thinking, well, maybe this is a better idea because they're actually surprisingly a lot cheaper. At that time, I didn't really know about the reasons why they were maligned, and I didn't know they were maligned and so on. But they were.
It's not till after you own it that you discover why they're so much cheaper.
That's right, and I didn't have any clue to begin with, but I thought, look, I'll jump into this hook, line, and sinker, and I bought a P38, and I thought, look, I now need to find out about it, and it's a good thing I did because I did all the reading and looked up everything I could to try and find out all the information, and of course the air suspension is a problem, and the electrics is a problem, and to be honest, those are really the two biggest problems actually, and the rest of it is a pretty basic mechanical Rover V8. Designed in the 1950s, what can possibly go wrong? Head gaskets, that kind of stuff can go wrong. But the usual story with the Rover V8, and all of those kind of things are pretty well known. So the big things you really have to learn if you're a P38 owner are the air suspension and the electronics, including the alarm system and so on, which can be temperamental.
And that climate control with all those motors that have to be electronically calibrated with a special computer.
Correct. Well, with a Nanocom or a Hawkeye or whatever, you can do all of that sort of stuff. I have a Nanocom which I bought separately, and you can kind of plug that in, and you get to understand most of the electrics. It's not that scary. You generally can work out what a problem is, and you can fix it yourself. And so, to me, the P38 is probably the last of the Land Rovers that the average home mechanic can easily do something with. And once you start getting to L322s, you're starting to get into territory where, home mechanics can certainly work on them, but you're starting to get a few more ECUs and bits and pieces, and it becomes a little bit harder to deal with. And very often you need a specialist and a specialist tool. Whereas for the P38, you can do most of it yourself, and it's relatively simple. So, that's kind of where I hung my hat and ended up with a P38, and I haven't regretted it ever since. It's not the cheapest thing to run, I have to say. It's not a problem if you don't run it too often, so you run it when you do off-road trips. Well, I run it for long trips with holidays and so on and so forth.
Right.
But
at $8 a gallon, you wouldn't want to drive it too far or too long.
Well, that's right. You don't want to drive it forever. So it does admittedly spend several weeks in the garage before I actually pull it out and do something with it. But when you do something with it, it's invariably extremely capable and very good. I don't want to spend enormous amounts of money dealing with it, but I have that same Land Rover disease that everybody else has. I guess most Land Rover owners are reasonably poor, and because of their Land Rovers, and that's definitely applies to me. So
you take a vow of poverty when you join up with the Land Rover world.
That's it. Yeah.
Have you made any modifications to your Range Rover?
Yes, I have. The P38's got quite a few modifications actually, but most of them are reasonably factory. So I've done a lot of modifications, such as replacing interior parts with upgraded parts, and I had a couple of. I had the good fortune, I guess, to have a couple of P38s that I got hold of that were breaking, that were more luxury versions than mine, and I managed to get a lot of the luxury interior parts out of it. So I got walnut paneling and things that the original didn't come with, and so I've managed to upgrade my interior. I've got some off-road, a lot of off-road bits and pieces, such as the rock sliders, or what you'd call tree sliders, I guess. Rock sliders, tree sliders. I put the diff guards on so that when I hit rocks, down in the riverbeds down south. I don't do too much damage to the diffs. And I've got various other things. I've got the snorkel, obviously. So the snorkels for a P38 are actually very hard to come by. There's
when you haven't whacked it off in the woods.
That's right. When I haven't whacked my snorkel off. Yeah, and I've done that a couple of times. I have to say, yeah, it's pretty good. And the Terra Firma models are a pretty good, reasonable snorkel for the P38. So you can do that. Right. But you can. A lot of people have done their own, built their own. So yeah, you can do that as well. And I haven't lifted my truck. I find that the air suspension does a reasonable job anyway. There's quite a lot of travel on the air suspension on a P38, more than most air suspension vehicals like Mercedes.
And there's a few tweaks you can do to improve that too.
There are, yeah. You can give it an electronic lift or a programmed lift as well. You can't go beyond the length that your height sensors will go to, but you can extend your height sensors, obviously, and then you're starting to get to the point where you're making mechanical modifications and so on. I haven't done any of that. I could do it, but I sort of look at some of the stuff that I do, in particular around the local area, and a lot of what I do here it tends to be forest and beach driving. And for beach driving, you really don't need it, and for forest driving, I just tend to try and be careful. I'd rather kind of keep it factory as if possible, just purely for the factor of the value when I come to sell it. I think if you don't modify it, the value is higher. So
wait, you're not going to sell it. It's not going to happen.
No, I won't sell it in a hurry. It's not going to happen. But if I did, I would probably, if I do sell it, I would probably go for something like a Discovery 4 or LR4, which is what you would call it. But in some ways, I almost think, what's the point? Those vehicles, the LR3 or Discovery 3, the LR4, Discovery 4, virtually have the same systems as the P38 already has. It's just that they are a newer version of it. And, the ECUs are different, obviously, but, the air suspension is different. It's a little bit harder to deal with, but it's still there. And so on and so forth. And I kind of feel like the P38's a good compromise because it's got all those systems, but they're easily dealt with by the average home mechanic, and that's why I've stuck with what I've got. As I say as well, those are really the only two Land Rovers that I've owned, a Discovery 2 and a P38, and so I can't call myself a long-term Land Rover owner. I know someone that's got 55. It's not.
Wait. Yes, 55 trucks, not a 1955.
No, 55 Land Rovers. That's right. He is 55.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's a good collection.
It's quite a good collection. Yeah, he's pretty well into his Land Rovers.
Does he drive them?
Not all of them. In fact, it's interesting.
Does he drive a significant portion of them?
He does drive a significant portion of them.
So then it's a collection, not a horde.
Oh, good question.
Yeah.
Is it a horde? I think it's.
But see, if more of them are drivable than not, then it's a collection. If none of them are drivable, it's a horde.
Oh, I see what you mean. I don't know if more of them are drivable or not. I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure I'd go that far. I think probably about a third of them are drivable.
Okay.
So I don't really know, but I'll tell you what, one of his Land Rovers actually, when I was there, I visited him reasonably recently, last year, and he had a 2014 Defender that he had got hold of. It was a insurance write-off because the insurance company, apparently the owners had reversed a boat into the water, and they had parked the rear tires only of this 2014 Defender in the water, in salt water, and so the salt water only got on the wheels. They launched their boat with it and then went to start the vehicle, and it wouldn't start. And they had to be pulled out, and there was what
pulled out of the water, you mean, right?
Out of the water.
That's how they listed it.
They only had the rear tires in the water, and they couldn't get it started. Nobody knew what was wrong with it, and so they claimed on insurance, and the insurance company threw their hands up in the air and said, "Oh, it's been in water, write off. That's it." So they wrote it off immediately. So this friend of mine got hold of this vehicle, and he replaced the diesel injectors in it, and it started up first time and ran ever since. And
the rear wheels, I would assume.
And the rear wheels. Well, I don't even think the wheels needed replacing. I think it was perfect. So he was lucky because he got that vehicle for around $20,000, which if you know what the value of the $20,000 would be, it's probably about a quarter of what it would normally be worth. So he had this thing parked on his farm, and he started it up for me one day, and he said, "Yeah, it goes perfectly fine. There you go. That's perfectly all right." And then I went out four-wheel driving with him, not in that vehicle. I went out four-wheel driving with him in another vehicle, and we came back, and a couple of days later, he sent me a message, and he said, "Do you happen to know what I did with the keys of the Defender, because I've lost them?"
Whoops.
And I said, no, I have no idea. He said, well, I had them in my pocket on that 4-wheel drive trip we went on. And I said, I never saw them. Didn't have a clue. So now he has a Defender sitting there on his farm, 2014, bought it for $22,000 with no keys, and he can't even get into it, and it's going nowhere. So there you go. That's one of the vehicles that is.
Hey.
Is that a hoard or is that a collection? I don't know.
I think he sounds like he's on the boundary there.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So
Actually, which leads me to a Defender question.
Yep.
Were Defenders available in New Zealand till the end of the run?
Yes, they were. Yep, absolutely. They were available right up to the end, and we're waiting with bated breath for the new one. You can ask me my views on the new one if you wish. I don't know. What
I think I know what those views are going to be based on what you've said. But why not?
Yeah.
Well, we ask everybody. What are your views on the new Defender?
So my view is actually the new Defender is a great vehicle. I think it makes a great Discovery. It'll make a fantastic addition to the Discovery lineup. So, honestly, there's nothing wrong with the new Defender. It's clearly not the utilitarian vehicle that the original was, and it's never going to be. It was never going to be. Don't let me malign it. I'm not going to malign Defenders as well. Now we're not going to get to that stage. But I sort of feel like it's moved away from its roots. Definitely, it's going to polarize people. But there's nothing really wrong with that. I think that's perfectly fine. So I'm happy with where they've gone. It's what makes them what makes JLR the most cash, the most money at the moment, and that's what they need to do. So it's not its roots. It's not the original, but it's never going to be. So there we go. Yeah, it's a Discovery to me. It's a Discovery.
I would definitely agree with Discovery. I mean, they were testing out all that equipment for years. Hopefully, that means that the first ones off the line will do better than the first Discovery 3s that came off the line that didn't do as well.
Yeah,
and you try to avoid those. But
yeah, sure.
All right, so you've had a Disco 2, you had a P38, and do you have a dream Land Rover that you could possibly have of anything, any of the line, anywhere?
Yeah,
don't worry about importation. Don't worry about anything like that.
That kind of stuff.
Is there a dream?
So let's come back then to the 6x6 Parenti, because I think that would be my dream. But I'll tell you what, the rarest of rare Parenti vehicles is the 6x6 double cab. So most of the Parentis have only a single cab on them, and they're especially the 6x6 ones. A lot of them are troop carriers and so forth. But the 6x6 Parakeet is the one that has the double cab, and I would love one of those. They're huge inside. And by the way, with the 6x6 versions of the Parenti, they actually that they cut the vehicle down the middle and they widened it. So it's a wider vehicle, it's a wider Land Rover than a standard Defender. The 4x4 versions are not, they're the same size. But if you look at the 6x6 versions, they're extremely wide, and you'll be able to see that if you look at a photo of them. So you need to Google for that, because they're a pretty cool vehicle, and I would love to have a double cab version of one of those. And I would turn that.
Now, does that mean they put different axles under it?
Yes, it does, but I don't know exactly what they did. You'd have to look up the specifications for that. I can't remember exactly, okay. But yep. It's and the chassis is different as well. I have an idea it was lengthened or extended in some way. I'm not sure. You'd have to look.
Do you know how much it was widened?
I think it was several inches. I think it was around 4 inches. It's quite a lot. We measured that, and it was measured in inches. I don't know why, but I don't know why they didn't use centimeters. But I have an idea it was quite a lot wider. I've got a photo of the
maybe they used inches because that's how we rate the wheelbases.
It could well be actually as well. So yeah, that might have been the reason. But when you see one of these on the road, you know it's a different vehicle. You instantly know that it's a Land Rover Defender, and it even says 110 on the front. But it's definitely a much bigger vehicle. It's a much larger beast. And I've got a photo of one that was on one of our group trips, and yeah, you can tell. And I guess you would say it was Australia's answer to the Humvee in many ways. So
or the Deuce and a Half.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. Yep.
Greg, thanks very much for coming on the podcast, talking about New Zealand and Land Rover community in New Zealand and your trucks too.
Thank you.
If folks wish to join the Land Rover, I know it's not a club, but I'm going to call it that just to make life easy for me. But if folks want to check out your Land Rover forum/club, where would they go to find that information?
Absolutely. So you can find us. We have our website, which is www.nzlrf.org.nz. And so that's our website. You can also find us on Facebook, which will be facebook.com/NZLRF. And under that, we have a number of groups. Obviously, we have the 4 different Facebook groups that we have. And I've also got groups going on the website. And in my experience and my view, only around 50% of Land Rover owners are actually on Facebook. So hence the website, and the idea of that really is to give them a place to interact, I guess, in the same way that social media interacts, so that they can be part of the community and that they don't get ignored. And so that's the reason why we started the website, and that's where I'd like to direct people. So if you want to come and look at us, we are open to Canada and the United States. I believe we're not open to Mexico. I can change that if anybody wants me to unblock Mexico. I can do that. I blocked off a lot of countries because of security reasons and spam and so on and so forth. So at the moment we've got a big beautiful wall, I guess, between the United States and Mexico, but a big beautiful firewall. There is a firewall there, but if we need to open it up, we can. So yeah, you guys are welcome to join. As I say, we've got plenty of people from around the world who've joined us. So,
and then you join each, because you were kind enough to let me join, yep. And you can join each of the different groupings that you have, or not. Yep. You can choose the ones that you wish to join.
That's right. Yeah, you don't have to join everything all at once. You can just join the groups that you're interested in. So if you're into Defenders, but you're not the least bit interested in Range Rovers, you can just join the Defender and Series group, and you'll be fine. So yeah, if you're into Freelanders, you can just join the Freelander group. No problem there.
That's right, as you should. Everybody should join the Mighty Freelander group.
Absolutely. Well, that's pretty much it, really. I mean, I think, in terms of the way the social media side of things works, that's probably the main thing. Is I wanted to make sure that people know that we're not just on social media. We're not tied to social media. We try to avoid, being kind of exclusive in that way. I've had people say to me, "Why don't you just get everybody to join Facebook?" I don't subscribe to that theory. It's not my sort of thing. I want to include everybody. If they don't want to be on social media, that's fine. And I would rather make sure that the website, is there to cater for everyone. Hopefully, we get a lot of joiners about that. I think we've got about a quarter of our people that have joined the website so far are non-Facebook users anyway.
I have a theory, Greg. I think the vast majority of Series and to some degree Defender owners are not on Facebook. I think that's my feeling.
Possibly the case, yeah. And I think actually if you talked about some of the newer vehicles like the L405, Range Rovers and so on and so forth, a lot of those people might be company executives and so on. They're not really interested in social media. So, it's kind of hard for them to find us otherwise. But yeah, so some of the newer vehicles possibly as well that applies to, but yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Greg, for talking about New Zealand and Land Rovers, and it was great hearing for it.
And thank you for having me, and best of luck. I hope to come and visit you guys sometime and see you out on the tracks. We'll go and have a trip together.
You are most welcome, and you're now being invited to come, especially to the Pittsburgh area. And if you wish to come to, you should come around when there's an event going on. And if not, we'll make one for you.
Thank you, and likewise for you guys. Obviously, you're and anyone on the podcast as well. You're more than welcome to come to New Zealand and come and have a look. Actually, do you know what? One thing I should say, we do have a sponsor for our website, and our sponsors are Love My New Zealand. They've been very kind to give us sponsorship this year so that we can build the website up and develop things. Love My New Zealand actually do high-end tours around New Zealand using Land Rovers, and so fantastic company.
There you go.
That's actually a question I meant to ask, and I forgot. I'm glad you brought that up, and we're trying to wrap this up. And this question, can visitors come down to New Zealand and rent a truck and drive around and tour? I assume they can't go off-road, but they could probably tour around.
Yes, they can, and to some extent you can go off-road, but I think you would have to check out the insurance requirements for that very carefully, and probably best to do it with others as well. But there is a company in New Zealand. There's multiple companies actually that hire out Land Rover vehicles, but there's one that I can mention in particular called Trekker Adventures, Trekker, trekkeradventures.co.nz, something like that, trekkeradventures.co.nz. You'd have to look up the website. I can't remember exactly, but I think that's it. Yeah, they hire out Defenders as well, so you can travel around the country in a Defender if you wish, no problem.
Fantastic. That's actually, that would be kind of a cool thing to do.
It would.
Sure, because you should.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe we can get one of those Parente 110 6x6s.
I don't think he has one of those in the fleet, unfortunately.
see, we've gone all this way, Greg, and you now let us down.
Well, there you go.
See at the very end.
Yep, there we are.
We'll just have to borrow one, I guess.
You'll have to borrow one. I have a couple of people you can borrow them from. So yeah. Oh well, thank you. Look, thank you very much for having me. Look, it's been a pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and actually, it's really good to talk about other communities out there and find out who's out there in the Land Rover world. Social media is a big thing, and you find out a lot of stuff, but social media is never the be all and end all of everything. And fantastic to see that there's a podcast out there that actually does talk about Land Rovers. And this is a bit of an eye-opener for me. I guess this is your way of getting away from Facebook as well, or social media. And
so you have 7 years of back episodes to catch up on then.
I do, and I've been catching up on a few of them, but I haven't had the time. Honestly, we have a newborn in the house, so I haven't had the time to catch up on all of them. Yeah, I will do that over time, I guess.
Yeah, 2.5 hours times 84 episodes. That'll take you a while.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, no worries. Oh, thank you very much for having me and everything. No, that's been really cool. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, and great to make new friends as well. So, yeah, thanks, guys.
So, Harold, there's been an update in your fleet. I saw you posted a picture. You got a Defender pickup.
Well, it's part of my fleet improvement plan, you might say. It's been sort of a perpetual New Year's resolution of mine to actually spend some time on my own stuff for a change, and it usually lasts about as well as any other New Year's resolution. But this year I'm actually executing, and it started the beginning of the year. I replaced my beater shop disco with a better beater disco. The old one was getting a little tired, so I have this one. It's actually a little nicer now, so I have that to play with. But the big capital improvement just happened. I have purchased for myself a Australian market 130 trayback.
Is it a slider? Does that slide?
No, a trayback is Australian for flatbed.
Right, very nice.
Apparently, I think it's probably a tax thing, but in Australia they don't do pickup trucks. They'll do station wagons and hard tops, that sort of thing, but everything else is brought in as a cab and chassis, and then you buy a tray or like a utility body or whatever you want for the back of it. So that's why people use these tray backs a lot for various things.
So was it already here, or did you get it from Australia?
Well, when I bought it, it was on the ship. I've been looking and casually looking, not really serious about it, but I was looking and I saw some stuff that a guy had posted and as well, no, that one's been sold, but I have some others. This is a guy in Texas who he is Australian, so he has an inside track on the cool stuff. And he buys them. He has a warehouse in Australia where he keeps them and brings them over. And this had been sitting in his warehouse in Melbourne for a while until it was old enough. This truck is 25 years and 1 month old. So he loaded it up, brought it over, assuming he was going to sell it at some point. And we were talking back and forth. So I bought it before it got here and been working on this deal for actually quite a while now, watching all the shutdowns happen with the corona, and we just managed to make it all happen, and so now I have the truck.
What is it again? It's a 19, was it? 90?
It's a 1995.
Right.
It's a 130 double cab trayback. 95 means it's a 300 TDI with an R380 and all the cool stuff, the disc brake rear axles, the ventilated front discs. And the diesel's been turned up a little bit, you might say. It's got an upsized intercooler in it. It's not like a monster or anything, but it has been turned up a little bit. Drives really nice. It's got one of the nicest R380s I've had the privilege of shifting. And the cool thing is, it's like unmolested, original. It's original paint, has that god-awful Defender stripe on the side to prove it. But this one actually is a Defender. It's new enough that it actually says Defender right on it. I had to look to find rust on this truck. There is one pinhole in one of the doors. That is the only perforation on the truck. The rest of it's just like stone chips. The frame is still black. Yeah, I mean, this truck is amazing. It's the nicest Defender, unrestored Defender I've ever seen.
And do you know what it did in Australia and any sense of its history?
It did important things. And it's going to continue doing important things for me.
No doubt.
It was a two-owner truck before I got it. The first owner was an interior design house in Queensland. And I know this because I have the original owner's manual with those entries in the book. never seen a Defender owner's manual before. That's pretty cool. And the second owner was a police officer. I'm not sure what he did with it, although I think he had dogs, because one of the pictures I saw had a big dog cage on the back of it. But I have a stack of service records. It's been well maintained. The Australians maintain their trucks quite well. I assume because there's a whole lot of nothing between here and where you're going. So you kind of need your vehicle to be reliable and well maintained.
Well, good for you. It sounds like really cool. I'm looking forward to checking it out.
Yeah, it's nice, and I'm looking forward to putting it to use. It's going to replace one of my other shop trucks that is getting near end of life.
The Dodge?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, and so this will be an opportunity to replace that truck with the Land Rover, which is always a good thing too. But it gets me one step nearer to the coveted all-diesel fleet as well.
Ooh, sounds like one hell of a shop truck.
Yeah, it should be nice. But I have two gripes with it, to be honest. My number one gripe is it's white.
Yeah, but it has a patina to it. At least in the picture, it looks like it had a patina.
Well, yeah, it's patinaed white. But the thing about it is, from what I understand, that was the option in Australia. It's like you get white or you get nothing. For several years, that was all you got. And then when they did start having colors, there is not a lot of options for colors. Everybody wants white. And my other gripe is that the flatbed is too short.
How long is it? 4 feet? It's
6 feet square, and I would like an 8-foot bed. So this truck might not stay 130.
Did you need to do anything else to get it roadworthy?
Roadworthy, no. It's quite roadworthy. Actually, I drove it up from Texas. It has a couple little issues that need to be sorted out, but it was certainly drove quite well. Turbo buzzing away like a swarm of cicadas the whole way. It was quite nice. That's the updates to my fleet for now, but we may come back later and give you more.
We hope you enjoyed show number 84 for March 2020. I want to thank our contributors, Morgan, Harold, and Dixon. As always, thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, well, $10 is $10.
Not a problem. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, as always.
What listeners don't see and will not see is that you have a bunch of Post-it notes on the ceiling behind you.
Yes, I do.
I thought that was an acoustic treatment of some sort.
I thought the same
for very
thing.
minor acoustics.
Although you do have a Centresteer sticker behind you, so that's good. Good call.
Strategically placed, no less.
For us to see and no one else. And thanks to Greg Byrom of the New Zealand Land Rover Club for telling us about Land Rovering in New Zealand. And also thanks to the One True Pax for his continued production support. Visit our website, Centresteer.com, to listen to previous shows and for show notes, which have links to stories discussed in today's show, including those cool new Defender Namibia videos. Those are really cool. We're part of the 4x4 Radio Network, and I invite you to check out the other 4x4 related shows at 4x4radionetwork.com. If you're not a subscriber to the podcast, please do so you get the show automatically downloaded to you when they come out. You can connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and email. And I guess I should add Twitch to that now, too. We're on twitch.tv. You can directly support the show at patreon.com/Centresteer, and that's center in the British spelling, CENTRESTEER. Thanks again to Bruce Fowler for being our latest Patreon subscriber. And now you can also buy us a tea, and you can show your support for the podcast with a t-shirt or sticker. Just click on Store on the menu of our webpage. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear from you and what you're up to in your Land Rover. Until next time, I ask you to share the show with one other Land Rover enthusiast.
You may now resume your essential things. One if by land, two if by sea, none if by Lucas.